Chapter 2269. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. Just as Zhuowen was looking at the gigantic heart that was surrounded by countless bugs in shock, a faintly discernible voice quietly reverberated in Zhuowen's ears. The voice sounded like it was talking in its sleep, but it also sounded like it was chanting. Zhuowen could hear the grief and pain in the voice clearly from afar. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The voice rang out once again, deep in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen growled and immediately used the soul-slaying technique, barely dispelling the voice. However, his ears could still clearly hear the mournful voice, as if he was hearing the howling of a wild ghost in a graveyard. Zhuowen immediately spread his torch dragon wings and left the place, flying towards the back of the cliff. He felt that it was impossible for something to happen to the cliff for no reason. It was definitely the work of that damned fatty. When Zhuowen arrived at the back of the cliff, he found that there was no sign of Ma Yujie. It was empty. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The same words appeared once more. But this time, it didn't reverberate by Zhuowen's ears or mind, and it was instead a loud roar that suddenly sounded out from the depths of the cliff. It was like a thunderclap that surged over and was deafening. Because of this loud roar, cracks began to appear on the blood-colored cliff, and it actually began to collapse. The killing intent that filled the surroundings also became more and more terrifying. It was as if the killing intent that was originally suppressed was completely released after that loud roar. What did that damned fatty do? Zhuowen's expression changed drastically. Under this sudden burst of even more powerful killing intent, he had no choice but to retreat repeatedly. He only stopped after retreating 1,000 meters away. His gaze was grave as he stared at the abnormal movement in front of him. Zhuowen was very clear that this situation would not happen for no reason. The only possibility was that someone had triggered some kind of mechanism. Zhuowen immediately thought of Ma Yujie, who went to the back of the cliff and disappeared. He knew that the abnormality of the cliff was definitely related to Ma Yujie. Now that Zhuowen had lost any clues about that damn fatty, and with such a violent change happening at the cliff, Zhuowen knew that he could only wait and see. Zhuowen found a secluded place and silently observed the cliff in front of him. The cliff in front of him kept collapsing. Suddenly, the earth-shattering roar burst out again, and the cliff completely collapsed. Then, Zhuowen found that the huge heart that appeared from the blood of the true dragon suddenly rushed out, wanting to break through the air and escape. Unfortunately, the heart did not fly very far. The countless blood-colored worms in the true dragon's blood tied the heart like chains and slowly pulled it back. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The moment the heart was tied, the roar suddenly burst out, and an invisible sound wave spread out in the space like ripples. Then, Zhuowen's pupils shrank as he found that the space actually stagnated because of the roar. Zhuowen's body seemed to have stopped moving because of the stagnation of the space. He could not move at all. At this moment, if someone wanted to kill Zhuowen, Zhuowen would not be able to resist at all. This time, Zhuowen was really shocked. Just the sound wave alone could reach such a terrifying power. What kind of existence was this guy? Boom. The moment the sound wave stagnated the space, the cliff completely turned into nothingness. Then, Zhuowen found that under the cliff was an endless dark abyss. Then, he saw an eyeball. The eyeball was several feet in size. The white of the eyeball was blood-colored, and the pupil was golden. It looked too strange. As soon as the eyeball appeared, blood-colored flames gushed out from the depths of its pupil. The blood-colored flames were like blood arrows. They shot out and hit the blood-colored worms tied to the heart. Boom. The blood-colored flames were very powerful. The worms that formed the chains were instantly broken, and the heart let out a joyful cry, intending to escape. Unfortunately, a terrifying dragon roar erupted from the blood pool. Then, a blood pillar suddenly surged out from the blood pool. If one looked carefully, the blood pillar was not formed by blood water, but by countless blood-colored worms. A huge dragon head rushed out from the blood pillar. The dragon head was also formed by those worms. The dragon head suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed the heart. The huge eyeball roared angrily and rushed out. Waves of terrifying blood-colored flames shot out and fought with the dragon head. The battle between the two was too terrifying. Just the shockwaves from the battle were enough to stop the starry sky. It was obvious how powerful the battle between the two was. Zhuowen hid in the distance and watched the battle. He was secretly shocked. Whether it was the dragon head or the eyeball, Zhuowen was no match for them. Even if it was the clone of Devourer King, Zhuowen felt that he would not be able to fight against either of them. This was because Zhuowen found that whether it was the dragon head or the eyeball, every move they made had earth-shaking power. He was all too familiar with this power. It was the power of the heavenly path. Previously, he was embarrassed by Mu Chunxue. Naturally, he was very familiar with the power of the heavenly path. Moreover, Zhuowen faintly found that the two of them were even more proficient in using the heavenly path than Mu Chunxue. It was as if they could control the heavenly path as if it was their own arm. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk just as the dragon head and the eyeball were fighting, a silent figure quietly poked his head out from the abyss below the cliff. Then, this figure came and went without a trace, rushing in a certain direction. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He immediately recognized this figure. Wasn't it that damn fatty, Ma Yujie? He didn't know when this guy had entered the abyss below the cliff. Moreover, looking at the way this guy was poking his head out, he was probably doing something shameful in there. However, this guy was really something. He was actually able to slip away under the watchful eyes of the dragon head and the eyeball. The two of them didn't notice him at all. The reason Zhuowen wasn't discovered was that he had hidden well in advance. In addition, he was quite a distance away from the cliff. It was understandable that the dragon head and the eyeball didn't notice him. However, that damn fatty had slipped away under their watchful eyes. It was obvious that this guy had used some unknown method to escape the battle between the two. Zhuowen restrained his aura and secretly followed. He wanted to see where this damn fatty was going. Chapter 2270. Powerful soul Banama Yujie was extremely cautious. As he was escaping, he had set up many restrictions behind him. Zhuowen was already a level 8 divine array master. In addition, these restrictions were set up by Ma Yujie at the last minute. There were many loopholes. Zhuowen deliberately went around these restrictions. After about an hour, Ma Yujie came to a pagoda monument. This pagoda monument stood on an inconspicuous desert. It looked exactly the same as the pagoda monument at the bottom of the Sun-Moon Lake. Zhuowen knew that this pagoda monument was probably a one-way teleportation array to leave this place. This fatty is indeed very familiar with this place. It seems like this is not his first time here. Zhuowen cursed in his heart. From the way this fatty came here so quickly and found the pagoda monument, it could be seen that this fatty was not a newcomer. Ma Yujie looked around. His powerful divine sense spread out as if he wanted to check if there was anyone around. Zhuowen quickly concealed his aura. He did not want this fatty to find out. After noticing that there was nothing strange in the surroundings, Ma Yujie muttered softly, "I haven't seen that Zhuowen since I came out. Could it be that he escaped?" Ma Yujie did not think too much about it. Instead, he started to break the restrictions on the pagoda monument. This time, Ma Yujie had a hard time breaking the restrictions. Obviously, this pagoda monument was much harder to break than the one he came in with. After 3 days, Ma Yujie had broken most of the restrictions. Success was imminent. However, his face changed drastically as he looked behind him. Boom, 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 boom. A thunderous sound came from the sky behind Ma Yujie. Immediately, a huge eyeball came whistling over. In the eyeball, there was monstrous anger as if its parents had died. Damn it. This guy abandoned his own heart and chased after me. This guy, Ma Yujie's face turned ugly. He took out a golden banner from his spiritual ring. There was a picture of a 5-clawed golden dragon on the banner. When Zhuowen saw the picture of the 5-clawed golden dragon on the banner, his pupils shrank. The five-clawed golden dragon on the banner was the same as the one he had frozen at the top of the ice tower. The moment the golden banner appeared, the golden light exploded. Then, the five-clawed golden dragon in the banner seemed to come alive. It roared and charged toward the eyeball. Boom! Boom! His eyes were filled with rage, and a monstrous blood-red flame rushed out from the depths of his pupils. The five-clawed golden dragon opened its mouth and spat out a golden flame that was not any weaker. Immediately, the entire region of outer space was filled with blood-red flames and golden flames. They intertwined with each other and constantly collided. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Although the golden flames were powerful, they were still inferior to the blood-red flames. In just 3 breaths of time, the golden flames were suppressed by the blood-red flames and burned into nothingness. Ma Yujie coldly snorted and took out another large banner. This banner was black, and there was also a huge strange beast engraved on it. Zhuowen stared at it, and his gaze became more solemn and doubtful. What was drawn on the black banner was actually the Devourer King. With Zhuowen's eyesight, he could naturally tell that the Devourer King was the one sealed at the top of the ice tower. When the ice tower shattered, the Devourer King and the five-clawed golden dragon's corpses also shattered and disappeared. However, the 2 banners that the fatty took out had actually drawn the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King. It seemed like the fatty did not explain many things in the ice tower. Zhuowen could also tell that the souls of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were sealed inside the 2 banners. Although the souls of these 2 powerful races were not at their peak, they were still not ordinary. They were extremely powerful. If Zhuowen were to face these 2 banners, the chances of him being defeated were still very high. The addition of the Devourer King immediately stabilized the one-sided situation. The combined might of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King was not something that ordinary cultivators could withstand. The eyeball was terrifying. Perhaps the owner of the eyeball was a supreme expert when he was alive. However, it was only an eyeball now. Its power could not be compared to its peak state. Moreover, even this eyeball was able to suppress the combined might of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King. Although it could suppress them, the eyeball could not do anything to the 2 souls. At the very least, it could not take down the combined might of the 2 souls for the time being. Ma Yujie let out a sigh of relief. He was extremely wary of this mysterious eyeball. Now that the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were able to resist this eyeball, it was beyond his expectations. However, he recalled that this eyeball had fought with the true dragon's blood before. It should have lost a lot of power in that battle. Therefore, the power it was displaying now was not as strong as when it first came out from the bottom of the cliff. Ma Yujie no longer cared about this. Instead, he focused on breaking the restrictions on the pagoda stele in front of him. He knew that he could not stay here for long. Although the eyeball had lost a lot of power in the battle with the true dragon's blood, the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were currently at a disadvantage. It would not be long before the eyeball could break through the combined might of the 2 souls. These 2 banners were the fatty's strongest trump cards. With these 2 banners, even Shu Tian Jiudeng might not be able to kill him. Once these 2 banners were broken through by the eyeball, he knew very well that his chances of dying would greatly increase. Zhuowen watched all of this in silence. He did not go out to help this damn fatty. He knew very well that this damn fatty had definitely obtained something good inside. If he wanted to get some benefits from this damn fatty, he had to pick the right time. Boom! 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 The eyeball was extremely angry. Blood-red flames surged out and formed an incomparably huge flaming hand. This flaming hand was too big, even bigger than the Devourer King and the five-clawed golden dragon. The flaming hand smashed down heavily. Immediately, the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were blasted away by the flaming hand. The defenses they had set up trembled violently as cracks appeared on the surface of their defenses. Ma Yujie also noticed the abnormality in the defenses and his face suddenly turned ugly. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King could not hold on for much longer. As for the restrictions on the pagoda stele, he would need another hour to break them. The 2 souls could not hold on for more than 2 hours. Brother Ma, do you need this Shuo's help? Just as Ma Yujie was vexed, an indifferent voice slowly sounded. Ma Yujie turned his head and immediately saw a figure rushing over a kilometer away. This figure was extremely fast, instantly bypassing the battlefield where the eyeball was and arriving in front of Ma Yujie. Chapter 2271. Demand Brother Zhuo, you came at the right time. Hurry up and help me. As long as you can block that eyeball for 2 hours, I will be able to completely break the restriction on the pagoda stele, Ma Yujie said in pleasant surprise. Zhuowen stood in front of Ma Yujie without moving. He just looked at the latter with a smile. Ma Yujie frowned and said, Brother Zhuo, what is the meaning of this? If you don't help, both of us will be left here. Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, Brother Ma, don't play riddles with me. I can help you, but no matter what, you have to pay me a certain amount of compensation, right? Ma Yujie's pupils shrank. He said in a deep voice, Brother Zhuo, this is related to our life and death. If you help me, you will be helping yourself. Zhuowen sneered and said, Brother Ma, if you don't pay me anything, why should I help you? If you don't care, I will leave immediately. After saying that, Zhuowen turned to leave. However, he was stopped by Ma Yujie. Ma Yujie smiled and said, Brother Zhuo, don't be so impulsive. How about this, you help me block that eyeball first. After we leave this place, I will give you the compensation. How about that? Zhuowen shook his head and said, you have to give it to me now. Moreover, what I want is the thing you obtained from the bottom of the cliff. Ma Yujie's pupils shrank. His face was ugly as he said, Brother Zhuo, you are really asking for too much. If you don't want it, we can just go our separate ways. Zhuowen said coldly. Ma Yujie's eyes rolled. Just as he was about to say something, a violent rumble came. He saw that the defense of the 5-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King was weakening. It would not be long before they were completely broken through. Ma Yujie gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, I obtained 2 Dao fruits at the bottom of the cliff. I will give you 1. After saying that, Ma Yujie took out a brilliant fruit from his spirit ring and handed it to Zhuowen. Zhuowen took the fruit and narrowed his eyes. The fruit was only half the size of a palm. However, the moment Zhuowen touched it, he actually felt a dense Dao rhyme. Moreover, the Dao rhyme contained dense heavenly energy. It was much denser than the heavenly energy from the heavenly blood he obtained from the Luo God Palace ruins. Just this Dao fruit alone had probably surpassed the heavenly Dao blood he'd obtained. Although Zhuowen did not know what the fruit of ways was, he did not show any surprise on his face. Instead, he put the fruit of ways away and looked at Ma Yujie. Brother Ma, it's impossible for you to have only obtained 2 fruits of ways after staying below the cliff for so long, right? Ma Yujie cursed in his heart. His eyes flickered and he said with a flattering smile, Brother Zhuo, do you think Dao fruits are cabbages that can be found on the street? They are the fruits condensed by experts at the life and death boundary. They are extremely precious. I am already very lucky to have obtained 2. Zhuowen still shook his head. Although he did not have much contact with this fatty, he more or less understood this fatty's character. This guy was definitely someone who hid things. Seeing that Zhuowen still did not make a move, Ma Yujie was furious. He took out 2 more Dao fruits from his spirit ring and said coldly, Brother Zhuo, I will take out 2 more Dao fruits. If you still think that I am hiding things, then don't blame me for breaking the pot. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He did not expect Ma Yujie to be so decisive. 3 Dao fruits. Otherwise, I will not make a move. Zhuowen said firmly. He knew that this fatty was very cunning. Since he could take out 2 more Dao fruits, he must have a lot of Dao fruits on him. Good. 3 Dao fruits it is. Ma Yujie agreed without hesitation. Seeing Ma Yujie agree so decisively, Zhuowen suddenly felt a trace of regret. He had still misjudged the number of Dao fruits on this fatty. But since he had already agreed, it was not good to change his mind. Ma Yujie immediately took out 3 Dao fruits and handed them to Zhuowen. He urged, Brother Zhuo, hurry up and make a move. My 2 banners won't last long. Although Zhuowen was somewhat unwilling, being able to obtain 4 Dao fruits in one go was still a pleasant surprise for him. He was very clear that if he continued to force this fatty, it was very likely that this damned fatty would give up on him. Agreeing, Zhuowen took a step forward and rushed towards the eyeball. This eyeball was extremely powerful. Even Zhuowen could not help but sigh at his own inferiority. If Zhuowen were to face this eyeball alone, Zhuowen would definitely not agree to Ma Yujie's request. But now, with Ma Yujie's trump card and the help of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King, Zhuowen felt that it would not be difficult to delay this eyeball for 2 hours. In the instant that the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were forced to retreat, Zhuowen suddenly took out the phagocytosis. At the same time, he also took out the Annihilation Meteor and 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword. This guy really has a lot of treasures. In front of the pagoda stele, Ma Yujie also noticed Zhuowen's actions, especially after seeing the phagocytosis, 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword, and Annihilation Meteor. He could not help but sigh in admiration. There was no need to mention the 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword and Annihilation Meteor, and the phagocytosis's might was not inferior to these 2 secondary heaven-crushing divine rune swords. In the entire 8 heavens, taking out 3 secondary heaven-crushing divine rune swords at once was definitely a rare sight. From this, one could see just how wealthy Zhuowen was. Seeing Zhuowen take out 3 secondary heaven-crushing divine rune swords, Ma Yujie no longer paid attention to the battle. Instead, he focused on breaking the restrictions on the pagoda stele. He was very clear that if Zhuowen took out 3 secondary heaven-crushing divine rune swords, together with his 2 soul flags, they would be able to delay the frenzied eyeball for 2 hours. Therefore, he naturally had to make the best use of his time to break the restrictions on the pagoda stele. Time slowly passed by. Ma Yujie's expression was extremely focused. When he broke the last restriction on the pagoda stele, he let out a long sigh. His eyes were filled with joy. Bang bang bang. At the same time, the souls of the 5-clawed golden dragon and the devouring king were finally unable to withstand the terrifying crimson flames released by the eyeball. Both of them exploded into countless streaks of golden light. As for the soul flags that carried the 2 souls, they had become dim and lifeless. It was clear that the 2 soul flags had been severely damaged. The phagocytosis, 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword, and Annihilation Meteor that Zhuowen took out were also destroyed. Zhuowen retrieved them. Meanwhile, Zhuowen's face was pale. Seeing that the timing was not right, he immediately retreated to the pagoda stele. Ma Yujie also saw this scene. He did not dare to be negligent. He immediately activated the one-way teleportation formation in the pagoda stele. A wave of milky white light accompanied by terrifying energy fluctuations spread out. In an instant, it enveloped Zhuowen and Ma Yujie. Zhuowen only felt dizzy. Then, as if his entire body was weightless, he felt as light as a feather. Soon, the 2 of them were teleported away by the milky white light. Chapter 2272. Dispelling the confusion, the milky white light on the pagoda stele came and went quickly. In just the blink of an eye, Zhuowen and Ma Yujie had completely disappeared from the pagoda stele. The moment the 2 were teleported away, the blood-red eyeball had already arrived beside the pagoda stele, but unfortunately, it was still a step too late. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie were nowhere to be seen. The eyeball roared angrily and slammed into the pagoda stele, smashing it into dust. After venting its anger for a while, the eyeball left this place. This pagoda stele was a one-way teleportation array, so it only had one teleportation opportunity. Once this teleportation opportunity was used, the pagoda stele would be completely useless. Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. What appeared before him was an unfamiliar starry sky. He was standing on a several dozen meter large meteorite, slowly drifting through the starry sky. Not far away, Ma Yujie rubbed his fat belly and looked around. His brows furrowed slightly. Zhuowen knew that this fatty probably didn't know where this place was. Brother Ma, this place should not be within the scope of the Great Brahma domain. Zhuowen looked at Ma Yujie and said slowly. Zhuowen was basically familiar with the places in the Great Brahma domain, but this place gave him a very strange feeling. There was only one explanation, and that was that this place was not the Great Brahma domain at all. Ma Yujie did not refute, but nodded and said, Ian, it seems that we have come to an unfamiliar star field. I just don't know where this place is. The pagoda stele in the secret realm was not set up by Ma Yujie, so he did not know where the teleportation destination was in advance, causing the two of them to be somewhat confused about where this place was. Brother Ma, what is that eyeball suppressed in the blood-stained cliff? Zhuowen looked at Ma Yujie seriously and asked in a deep voice. He felt that Ma Yujie must know something. Otherwise, how could the latter know that there was a Dao fruit under the cliff? Ma Yujie smiled bitterly and said, Brother Zhuo, in fact, I don't know what's going on with the blood-stained cliff. You are wondering why I know there is a Dao fruit under the cliff, right? Zhuowen was taken aback and immediately nodded, indicating that he had agreed. Ma Yujie said helplessly, You don't know. When I felt the peerless killing intent on the blood-stained cliff, I guessed that the person suppressed under the cliff was probably a Dao-confirming realm expert. Wherever a Dao-confirming powerhouse stays, a Dao fruit is bound to condense. To tell you the truth, there are two types of Dao fruits. One is when the Dao fruit is formed during the moment when the Dao-confirming expert successfully reaches the life and death extremities. The other is when the Dao-confirming expert inadvertently forms a Dao fruit while cultivating. Zhuo Wen's eyes lit up as he interrupted, You guessed that the person in the cliff was a Dao validation powerhouse, so you guessed that there must be a Dao fruit inside. Ma Yujie hurriedly nodded and said, That's right. Otherwise, why would I enter such a dangerous place? In the end, my guess was correct. There was indeed a Dao-confirming realm cultivator under the cliff. Moreover, it was a Dao-confirming realm cultivator whose corpse was dismembered. I also obtained some Dao fruits there. Zhuowen's pupils contracted. He didn't think that a Dao-confirming realm cultivator's corpse could be dismembered. Who did it? Could it be a heaven-crushing cultivator or the owner of the blood pool, the dragon tribe? Ma Yujie also saw the shock in Zhuowen's eyes and knew what the latter was puzzled about. He said solemnly, You don't need to ask me. In fact, I'm not very sure either. Dao-confirming realm cultivators are indeed much more powerful than Void Sky 9 Ascends, but there is still a large gap between them and heaven-crushing realm cultivators. With the power of a heaven-crushing cultivator, it's actually very easy for them to kill a Dao-confirming realm cultivator. They wouldn't be so bored as to dismember the corpse and seal it. In other words, only a Dao-confirming realm cultivator would be able to do such a thing. Zhuowen fell silent. Then, he asked, Now that there's no teleportation formation in that place, does it mean that we won't be able to enter in the future? Although Zhuowen asked this, he wasn't too worried in his heart. This was because he had left a mark in that mystery realm in advance. With his current level of formation Dao, he was completely capable of following those marks to set up a one-way teleportation formation and teleport himself over. Zhuowen believed that this damned fatty's level of formation Dao was even higher than his, so he had definitely left a mark in that mystery realm as well. Ma Yujie put on an act, and said, You're right. The one-way teleportation formation can only be used once. Since the two of us have already used it, we basically won't be able to enter. However, aside from the dragon's blood and the Dao fruit, there's actually nothing else useful in there. Moreover, we already have both of these things, so there's actually nothing left to regret. Zhuowen sneered in his mind. He didn't believe that this damned fatty really had any regrets. Moreover, he also didn't believe that there was only the Dao fruit at the bottom of that cliff. Dao-confirming powerhouses were powerhouses above the 9 steps of Void Sky and the 2 extremities of life and death. They were a transitional stage towards the heaven-crushing stage. Such powerhouses were extremely terrifying. Yang Kai didn't believe that there was only the Dao fruit left behind. Of course, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't say this out loud. He was very clear that his current strength was still insufficient. Even if he left a mark in that mystery realm, it would be useless. If he entered again, he would probably immediately be annihilated by that eyeball. Zhuowen planned to wait until his strength increased before entering again. At the very least, it would be better for him to enter that mystery realm again after his main body reached the 9 steps of Void Sky or his clone reached the 3 extremities. Otherwise, he would most likely lose his life in vain. By the way, Brother Ma, may I ask how to use this Dao fruit? Zhuowen asked again. Ma Yujie glanced at Zhuowen with a strange expression as if he was looking at an idiot. Brother Zhuo, have you never heard of the Dao fruit? Ma Yujie asked. Zhuowen smiled awkwardly and didn't answer. If it weren't for Ma Yujie, he might not even know about Dao confirming, let alone the Dao fruit. Ma Yujie looked at Zhuowen's expression and knew that the latter really knew nothing about the Dao fruit. He secretly regretted it. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have directly said that he had the Dao fruit. He should have said something else. However, regret was useless now. He knew that it was impossible to take back the Dao fruit from Zhuowen, so he could only explain, Brother Zhuo, the power of the first 8 steps of the virtual sky world all comes from the starry sky law. Among them, the peak of the 8 steps of void sky is comprehending the starry sky law. There are 2 ways to advance in the 9 steps of void sky. One is to comprehend the most powerful starry sky law, the spacetime law, and advance to the 9 steps of void sky. The other is to comprehend a trace of the heavenly Dao law and turn it into a trace of heavenly Dao blood and integrate it into the body. Chapter 2273. Gulan Galaxy Dao validation is actually verifying one's own Dao, a true great Dao that belongs to oneself. Once the verification is successful, one will condense a Dao fruit that belongs to oneself. Every Dao validation powerhouse's Dao fruit is different, and its attributes and power are completely different. For example, the Dao fruit I obtained from the Dao validation powerhouse suppressed under the cliff should be a fire attribute Dao fruit. It is a 5-elemental Dao fruit, and its power is definitely much more terrifying than the fire origin. Once you have a Dao fruit, and you are still a rookie who has yet to come into contact with the heavenly Dao, you can rely on this Dao fruit to cultivate a heavenly Dao of the same attribute as it. Then, you can quickly cultivate your own Dao. Of course, there is another way. The Dao fruit can be refined into an offensive divine weapon. This kind of divine weapon's power is definitely much stronger than a sub-heaven-breaking divine weapon. However, there should be very few craftsmen in this galaxy who can refine Dao fruits. Zhuowen listened carefully. As Ma Yujie continued to explain, Zhuowen began to have a good understanding of Dao fruits. Zhuowen planned to cultivate the spacetime law. This Dao fruit was not suitable for Zhuowen, and the Luotian heavenly Dao blood he obtained from the Luotian palace ruins was not suitable for him to comprehend his own Dao. Zhuowen planned to use the heavenly Dao blood as an offensive method, which could also be considered a trump card for him. As for the 4 Dao fruits he had, he planned to find a way to integrate them into the phagocytosis. The devouring seal had great potential. If he could refine all of the 9,999 restrictive spells inside, its power would far surpass that of a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact. It should be comparable to a Dao verification divine artifact. If it was integrated with the Dao rhythm of the Dao fruit, Zhuowen believed that the power of the phagocytosis would increase by a lot. However, the problem now was that such a powerful craftsman were difficult to find. After Ma Yujie finished explaining, he fell silent. However, his gaze soon fell on the distant starry sky in front of him. There, a stream of light was rushing in their direction. Zhuowen also noticed this stream of light. His spiritual consciousness extended out and discovered that this stream of light was a huge flying ship. The appearance of this flying ship was very similar to the god Lu that Zhuowen had snatched in the far west. Zhuowen knew that this flying ship should be a large flying ship that specialized in transporting cultivators. Generally, this kind of flying ship would have a considerable force behind it. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie sent a signal to the flying ship, and the flying ship immediately stopped near the meteorite they were on. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie both had their own flying ships, and the quality and speed of their flying ships were definitely many times better than this flying ship. However, the 2 of them did not intend to use their own flying ships. After all, they did not even know where they were. Were they supposed to fly around like flies? They had to know where this place was, so they didn't mind following the flying ship to its destination. After the flying ship stopped, the cabin door opened. At the cabin door, a middle-aged man with a cold expression casually waved at Zhuowen and Ma Yujie. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie did not release their auras. They knew that the cultivators on the flying ship were not strong, so there was no need for them to release their auras to threaten the other party. After all, they were just passing by. They also wanted to ask the cultivators on the flying ship where they were. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie entered the cabin door, and the middle-aged man unceremoniously spread out his right hand and said, "Hand over 100 high-grade divine stones first. If you don't have high-grade divine stones, then 20,000 medium-grade divine stones is fine. If you don't have any, then I'm sorry, our flying ship doesn't welcome you." However, Zhuowen found it funny in his heart. The middle-aged man's price was quite high, but to the wealthy Zhuowen and Ma Yujie, 100 high-grade divine stone was nothing, so the two of them straightforwardly handed over the divine stone. After putting away the divine stones, the middle-aged man's attitude improved a lot. He nodded slightly at Zhuowen and Ma Yujie and said, "Come with me. Since you cut the line halfway, our flying ship doesn't have any extra rooms. I can only arrange for you to go to the warehouse." Zhuowen and Ma Yujie didn't care much. When the middle-aged man brought them into the warehouse, the two of them subconsciously frowned. This was because the warehouse's environment was too bad. It was filled with a mess of goods, and the air was filled with an unpleasant smell. Especially since the starry sky energy inside was extremely thin. At a glance, one could tell that this was the worst part of this airship. After the middle-aged man brought Zhuowen and Ma Yujie in, he didn't want to care about them anymore, so he turned around and was about to leave, but he was stopped by Zhuowen. "What can I do for you?" the middle-aged man asked Zhuowen rather rudely. Zhuowen didn't care. He took out a high-grade divine stone from his bosom, handed it to the middle-aged man, and asked with a smile, "Brother, may I know the destination of this flying ship?" "Can you tell me?" The middle-aged man glanced at the high-grade godstone. His body trembled, and he immediately put the high-grade godstone away. His indifferent attitude immediately became somewhat friendly. The flying ship's destination is the Gulen Galaxy. As one of the richest galaxies in the Six Desires heavenly domain, the Gulen Galaxy has everything. As long as you have enough money, you can get enough satisfaction, the middle-aged man replied. Zhuowen was startled. He didn't expect that he would come to the Six Desires heavenly domain by accident. Hearing this person mention the Gulen Galaxy, Zhuowen couldn't help but recall the starry sky chart of the 8 heavens that he had seen in the Half-Moon Palace. His memory was fixed on the starry sky chart of the Six Desires heavenly domain. The Gulen Galaxy was the most prosperous and wealthy galaxy in the Six Desires heavenly domain. It was very famous in the Six Desires heavenly domain. Zhuowen also remembered that the Gulen Galaxy wasn't very far from the river of spacetime quicksand. It seemed that there was a transmission array in the Gulen Galaxy to the river of spacetime quicksand. Of course, regarding the river of spacetime quicksand, Zhuowen wasn't big-mouthed enough to tell Ma Yujie about it. This damn fatty wasn't simple. If he told this damn fatty that he was going to the river of spacetime quicksand, the fatty would inevitably become suspicious. Once he became suspicious, Zhuowen knew that it wouldn't be easy for him to get the spacetime key back alone. After Zhuowen asked a few more unimportant questions, the middle-aged man took the high-grade divine stone and left the place. "I didn't expect to come to the Six Desires heavenly domain. That one-way transmission array is really amazing. It can actually cross an entire heavenly domain to another heavenly domain. This is definitely the most powerful one-way transmission array I have ever seen." The damn fatty casually found an open space and sat down. His head kept shaking. Obviously, he didn't believe that the one-way transmission array could send him so far away. Chapter 2274. Absorbing the true dragon's blood inside the damp warehouse, Zhuowen and Ma Yujie each found a place to sit cross-legged and began to cultivate. Zhuowen took out the bottle of dragon blood he had obtained from the blood-stained cliff. He had asked Ma Yujie about the usage of the true dragon's blood. It was said that the true dragon's blood could be fused with one's flesh and blood, which could greatly enhance one's physical strength. Moreover, Zhuowen had learned from Ma Yujie that the true dragon's blood in the blood-stained cliff wasn't simple. It was an expert even among the dragon clan. If one absorbed the true dragon's blood, their physical strength would be comparable to the ordinary devouring clan. Although the ordinary devouring clan wasn't as terrifying as the devouring king, they were still terrifying existences to the human clan. Ordinary giant star beasts couldn't be compared to the real devouring clan. If Zhuowen's main body absorbed the true dragon's blood and forged such a terrifying body and spirit, it would be a great boost to his main body. Thinking of this, Zhuowen poured out a drop of true dragon's blood from the bottle and used his divine power to fuse it with his body. The moment the true dragon's blood fused with his body, he found that the blood in his body was boiling. At the same time, a series of explosive sounds burst out from his body. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect the true dragon's blood to have such a great effect on him. It's so easy to absorb. Didn't Ma Yujie say that the true dragon's blood is very difficult for the human clan to absorb? How come it's so easy for me to absorb? After Zhuowen absorbed that drop of true dragon blood into his body, Zhuowen could clearly feel that his physical body had indeed strengthened quite a bit. After absorbing the true dragon's blood, Zhuowen's eyes fell on Ma Yujie, who wasn't far away. He found that this damn fatty had also begun to absorb the true dragon's blood. However, he found that this guy's process of absorbing the true dragon's blood was extremely complicated. First, he used some kind of divine flame to refine the true dragon's blood. After that, he carefully absorbed the refined true dragon's blood into his body. Moreover, when the true dragon's blood entered his body, he saw this guy grimace in pain. It was obvious that absorbing the true dragon's blood wasn't easy. However, Zhuowen had directly absorbed the drop of true dragon blood without feeling any discomfort. Instead, after absorbing the true dragon blood, his body was filled with abundant strength. Is it because I'm a Riker-S dragon's soul, dragon's soul? In Riker-S dragon's blood, in some sense, Riker-S Riker, dragon's Riker Riker, Ryu dragon's dragon Riker-S Riker. Dragons Ryu Ryu's dragon Ryu. For example, Xiao Hei was the Great Abyss Saint Dragon. However, it wasn't a real dragon, but the dragon's bloodline in its body was thicker. That was why Xiao Hei's dragon soul was so powerful. The five-clawed golden dragon that Zhuowen saw on the ice tower was a real dragon. Its strength wasn't any weaker than the Devourer King. Although this was only Zhuowen's guess, he knew that Zhuowen's guess was more reliable. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how he could absorb the true dragon's blood so easily. Thinking of this, Zhuowen looked at the true dragon's blood in the bottle. He didn't absorb the true dragon's blood drop by drop. Instead, he poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle and absorbed it into his body. The true dragon's blood's energy fluctuation was extremely violent. When Zhuowen poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle, it immediately attracted Ma Yujie's attention. Ma Yujie's eyes narrowed. He looked at Zhuowen in front of him and found that the latter had poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle. He was shocked and wondered if this guy was crazy. He knew better than anyone how violent the true dragon's blood was. Even if it was him, if he wanted to absorb the true dragon's blood, he would have to go through a lot of refining before he dared to absorb it. Moreover, he would only dare to absorb one drop. It was basically impossible for someone like Zhuowen to pour out an entire bottle of true dragon's blood and absorb it all. Moreover, there was a possibility that he would be torn to pieces by the violent energy contained in the true dragon's blood. Just as Ma Yujie was about to remind him, Zhuowen had already absorbed the entire bottle of true dragon's blood into his body. This guy is crazy. He's courting death. Ma Yujie muttered in a low voice. He thought that Zhuowen was courting death. However, he soon discovered that not only did Zhuowen not die from the true dragon's blood, but he was also rapidly absorbing the true dragon's blood. Moreover, as he absorbed the true dragon's blood, the surface of his body actually emitted traces of red light. Moreover, thunderous dragon roars erupted from his body. This guy actually absorbed the true dragon's blood so easily. Ma Yujie's mouth opened slightly as he said in extreme shock. At this moment, Zhuowen's entire body was wrapped in a bloody light. His cheeks were red as if he was drunk. Zhuowen could clearly feel that after the true dragon's blood entered his body, it quickly fused with the blood in his body. The fusion of the true dragon's blood flowed continuously through his 8 extraordinary meridians, nourishing his entire body and beginning to strengthen his physical body. 3 days later, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were bursting with excitement. He could clearly feel that his physical body had undergone a qualitative transformation under the refinement of the true dragon's blood. Ma Yujie was stunned. He stared blankly at Zhuoan, who not only did not die from the true dragon's blood, but was instead full of vitality. He did not know what to say. Zhuoan turned his head and smiled at the stunned Ma Yujie. He said with a smile, "Brother Ma, what's wrong?" Ma Yujie came back to his senses and smiled embarrassedly. He said, "Nothing. I'm just a little curious. Brother Zhuo, you're not afraid of the true dragon's blood's corrosion at all?" Zhuoan shook his head and said, "I'm not sure either. Maybe I'm just lucky. After absorbing the true dragon's blood, it didn't harm me at all." Ma Yujie's face twitched. He knew that Zhuoan was not telling the truth. Although he wanted to ask how the latter did it, judging from the latter's appearance, even if he asked, he might not necessarily tell him, so he simply did not ask. Over the next few days, the two of them continued to cultivate in the warehouse while Ma Yujie continued to refine and absorb the true dragon's blood. However, his speed was extremely slow. Chapter 2275. Shark-killing fleet. 10 days later, Ma Yujie finally managed to refine the third drop of true dragon's blood with great difficulty. After absorbing it, the entire flying ship shook violently as if the earth was shaking. Zhuoan and Ma Yujie both opened their eyes and looked at each other. However, they didn't get up and leave the cabin. Instead, they released their divine consciousness to investigate what was happening outside the flying ship. When they entered the flying ship, they had already used their divine consciousness to investigate. They knew that the strongest person on the flying ship was only a Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator. There were only 3 Void Sky experts on the flying ship. Apart from the strongest Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator, one of the remaining 2 was a Void Sky Stage 1 Ascension cultivator and the other was a Void Sky Stage 2 Ascension cultivator. It could be said that whether it was Zhuoan or Ma Yujie, either of them only needed to lift a finger to destroy the flying ship. However, their attention wasn't on the flying ship, but on the fleet that was sweeping over from the surroundings. There were more than 10 flying ships in the fleet, and each flying ship had a large flag with a picture of a shark on it. "It seems like we've encountered bandits." Ma Yujie curled his lips and said helplessly. Zhuoan didn't answer. Instead, his divine consciousness noticed a beautiful woman in the most luxurious cabin of the flying ship. The reason he noticed this woman was mainly because of the 2 old men beside her. These 2 old men were Void Sky experts. One of them was the strongest Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator on the flying ship, while the other was a Void Sky Stage 2 Ascension cultivator. As for the third Void Sky expert on the flying ship, he was the captain of the flying ship and was a Void Sky Stage 1 Ascension cultivator. Zhuoan and Ma Yujie had already noticed this woman. After all, in such an ordinary flying ship, there were actually 2 Void Sky experts as bodyguards. Obviously, this woman's identity wasn't simple. They might not be bandits. Perhaps their target is that woman? Zhuoan said with a faint smile. Ma Yujie raised his eyebrows and said, "That's also possible." At this moment, the flying ship's captain, Hua Yongjun, trembled. He stopped the flying ship and looked at the surrounding flying ships in the control room. His face instantly turned pale. "Shark-killing fleet? How did we encounter such a fleet? It's over." Hua Yongjun trembled all over. The murderous shark fleet was a well-known killer force in the 6 Desires heavenly realm. Although it could not be compared with the real first-class forces in the 6 Desires heavenly realm, it was definitely one of the best among the second-class forces. Their small fleet was simply a dead end in front of the shark-killing fleet. At this moment, a thin man walked down from the leading airship of the shark-slaughtering fleet. He looked at the airship surrounded by the fleet with his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "Everyone in the airship, come down. Otherwise, I'll destroy your airship immediately." As soon as the skinny man said this, the enclosed cabin of the flying ship was immediately opened. Then, a group of people walked out from inside. Captain Hua Yongjun walked in front with a flattering smile. He nodded and bowed to the skinny man and said, "Sir, if you have any orders, just say it. I'll definitely do it for you if I can." The skinny man glanced sideways at Hua Yongjun, grabbed the void with his right hand, and lifted Hua Yongjun in his hand. The people who came down from the cabin all trembled in fear when they saw the captain being lifted so easily by the skinny man. The beautiful woman, who was mixed in the crowd, frowned slightly. She knew very well that the shark-slaughtering fleet stopped the airship for her. "Miss, this old servant will help you block this man. When the time comes, run away immediately," the old man said softly to the woman. "Old Chen, this man is Ji Sho, the captain of the shark-slaughtering fleet. His cultivation base is much higher than yours. You can't stop him." The beautiful woman shook her head. Old Chen, who was unafraid of death, said, "Miss, this old servant will help you escape even if it costs me my life." The beautiful woman sighed softly but remained silent. She knew that the two old men beside her would probably die here today, and there was a high chance that she would also fall. The skinny man lifted the captain and didn't even say a word. His right hand suddenly exerted force, and a surge of divine power invaded the captain's body and completely annihilated him. "Miss Cow, this king really didn't expect you to hide in this small airship. Isn't it a bit beneath your noble status to take such an ordinary airship? Why don't you come to our shark-slaughtering fleet? This king promises to make you comfortable." The skinny man's gloomy eyes fell on the crowd. At the same time, a terrifying divine sense swept over and began to scan the trembling crowd. The beautiful woman hiding in the crowd sighed softly. With a wave of her lily-white hand, an azure brilliance burst out and condensed into a huge azure wand. The beautiful woman leaped onto the azure wand, turned into an azure light, and disappeared from the spot at an extremely fast speed. The skinny man snorted coldly and grabbed with his right hand. A terrifying divine power condensed into a huge hand that covered the sky and mercilessly grabbed at the azure wand. Unfortunately, when the skinny man made his move, the two old men beside the beautiful woman rushed out at the same time. The two of them immediately summoned the illusory heavenly bridge and then detonated it. The terrifying explosive energy instantly caused the scrawny man's terrifying hand to collapse. Then, the terrifying explosive energy swept the scrawny man like a hurricane. The skinny man frowned. With a flick of his finger, he took out a jade-colored divine sword from his spirit ring. This divine sword instantly slashed out countless sword shadows, and the terrifying explosive energy was blasted into countless pieces by these countless sword shadows. However, the skinny man's movements were slightly stagnant because of the explosive energy, and he completely lost the opportunity to grab the azure wand. "Kill everyone here. I'll go after that woman." After the skinny man gave some instructions, he leaped out and chased after the azure wand. As soon as the skinny man left, more than a dozen airships of the shark-slaughtering fleet launched the cannons on the airships one after another. In an instant, colorful energy cannons burst out. The cultivators who were surrounded all showed a look of fear. The energy cannons of more than a dozen airships fired at the same time. The energy that erupted was extremely terrifying. These cultivators couldn't block it at all. As for escaping, it was impossible. The shark-slaughtering fleet had already set up a terrifying trap and kill array around them when they surrounded them. There was no way for them to escape. However, when these energy cannons were about to hit everyone, a bloody light swept out. Then, these terrifying energy cannons were all blocked by this bloody light and then collapsed into nothingness. After the energy cannons were blocked by the bloody light, this bloody light swept out like a long rainbow and instantly blasted through more than a dozen airships in the surroundings. Then, the dozen or so flying ships all exploded into powder. Everyone who had just walked through the gates of hell was shocked when they saw this scene. Only now did they see that this bloody light was actually a divine sword with a body as bright as blood. After this bloody sword exploded more than a dozen airships in an instant, it rushed to the side of a white-clothed young man among the crowd. Chapter 2276. A chance encounter. The moment the blood sword appeared in front of the white-robed young man, how could the surrounding people not know that the white-robed young man was the one who had just destroyed more than a dozen airships and saved them? "Thank you for saving us, senior." One of the clever cultivators quickly came out and cupped his fists to Zhuoan to thank him. Only then did the rest react and follow this person to thank Zhuoan. Zhuoan just nodded in response. He was standing in the crowd, and since the shark slaughtering fleet intended to kill them, Zhuoan naturally could not sit back and do nothing. On the other hand, Zhuoan looked at the woman surnamed Cao, who had just escaped, in a new light. The blue luan released by the woman surnamed Cao was extremely fast, almost as fast as a void sky 7th step cultivator. The thin man, the captain of the shark slaughtering fleet, was only a void sky 5th step cultivator. In Zhuoan's opinion, it would be difficult for him to catch up with the woman surnamed Cao. That little girl is a little interesting. That blue luan is not a kind of starry sky beast, but a kind of powerful energy. It should have been left to her by the elders of her family for her to escape. Ma Yujie clicked his tongue in wonder. Zhuoan did not answer. Instead, he looked for a cultivator beside him and asked for a map to the old Orchid Star River. After that, he turned to Ma Yujie and said, "Brother Ma, you and I are not familiar with the Six Desires heavenly domain, and our cooperation ended after we left that blood-stained cliff. This Zhuo will take his leave now." After saying that, Zhuoan did not give Ma Yujie any chance to speak. With a wave of his sleeve, he flew away with the blood-immortal sword. Ma Yujie had his hands behind his back as he silently looked at Zhuoan's departing figure, and he shook his head slightly as he muttered to himself. This fellow left in such a hurry. Could it be that there's something shameful? If there is, then it will be interesting. I will also go to the Gulan Galaxy to take a look. Saying so, Ma Yujie casually grabbed a cultivator who was about to leave this place and threatened him. The cultivator obediently handed over the route map to the old Orchid Star River. Ma Yujie casually tossed the cultivator aside and used his divine sense to check the route map of the Gulan Star River. Then, with a stomp of his right foot, he left this place. Zhuoan sat cross-legged in the airship, holding the phagocytosis in his right hand and the small temple in his left. He used the faith power of the small temple to refine the phagocytosis in his right hand. During this time, Zhuoan had been diligently refining the phagocytosis in his hand. When he was in the bone realm, he had already refined the 1,000 restrictions in the phagocytosis. However, from the time he came out of the starry sky until now, he had only refined 1,000 seals, which added up to a total of 2,000 seals. It could be said that Zhuoan's speed of refining the last 1,000 restrictions was obviously much slower than before. From this, it could be seen that the restrictions in the phagocytosis were getting more and more powerful. The time that Zhuoan needed to refine them was much more terrifying than before. Thinking that there were a total of 9,999 restrictions in the phagocytosis, Zhuoan knew that it would take him a very long time to completely refine all of them. Of course, the power of the phagocytosis was constantly increasing. Now, the phagocytosis was much more useful to him than the 9 extinction divine rune sword and the apocalyptic meteor. He knew that as long as he worked tirelessly, all the restrictions in the phagocytosis would eventually be conquered by him. "Kid, there is a battle ahead. Do you want to go around it?" Xiao Hei, who was controlling the airship in the control cabin, suddenly said. Now, Zhuoan basically handed over the control of the airship to Xiao Hei and the Blood Immortal. He treated it as a hands-off boss and crazily cultivated or refined the phagocytosis. Ever since the incident with Mu Chunxue in the Disaster Canyon, Zhuoan felt that his strength was not enough. Although his current strength had actually surpassed most of the cultivators, it was still not worth mentioning in front of the powerhouses in the Void Sky 9 steps. Therefore, Zhuoan wanted to increase his strength as soon as possible. Zhuoan casually swept out with his divine sense and found that the people fighting were 2 men and a woman. Zhuoan was familiar with the man and woman among the 3 people. One of the men was the thin man from the shark-killing fleet, and the woman was the woman surnamed Cao. Zhuoan had never seen the other man before. This man was not young, about 35 years old. His body was quite strong, and his skin was wheat-colored. From the traces of the battle, Zhuoan could tell at a glance that these 2 men were in cahoots. Zhuoan silently watched the battle. The strong man did not make a move, but stood on the side with his arms crossed. The thin man attacked the woman surnamed Cao like a storm. Although the woman surnamed Cao's cultivation was far from being a match for the thin man, the Qingluan circled around her and blocked the thin man's attacks for her. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the strong man. The thin man's cultivation was not high, only at the 5th step of the void sky 9 steps. However, the strong man's strength was even higher, reaching the peak of the 6th step of the void sky 9 steps. With the speed of the woman surnamed Cao's Qingluan, the thin man could never catch up. However, the thin man had caught up to her. Clearly, it was because of the strong man. Although the Qingluan's speed was comparable to an ordinary cultivator at the 7th step of the void sky 9 steps, while the strong man was only at the peak of the 6th step of the void sky 9 steps, Zhuowen knew that the strong man should have a special trump card. Senior brother, can you help this little girl? As long as senior brother helps me, this little girl will repay you generously. The moment Zhuowen's airship appeared, it attracted the attention of the 3 people. The thin man did not even look at the airship, but the strong man narrowed his eyes and his spiritual sense suddenly turned into a big hand, annihilating the spiritual sense derived from Zhuowen's probing. The woman surnamed Cao, on the other hand, seemed to be desperate and sent a voice transmission to Zhuowen. Zhuowen withdrew his spiritual sense and stopped the airship. He walked down from the airship and looked at the strong man with a rather unfriendly gaze. The spiritual sense derived from Zhuowen's spiritual sense was only used to probe, so it did not have any offensive power. It was a polite inquiry between cultivators. However, the strong man had forcibly annihilated his spiritual sense. This meant that he did not put him in his eyes at all. After Zhuowen walked out of the airship, the strong man sized up Zhuowen and frowned slightly. He was clearly a little surprised that the young man in white in front of him was also a cultivator at the 6th step of the void sky 9 steps. Of course, although Zhuowen's aura was also at the 6th step of the void sky 9 steps, there was still some distance between him and the peak of the 6th step of the void sky 9 steps. Although the strong man was a little apprehensive, he did not care too much. Friend, our shark slaughtering fleet is handling matters here. You'd better not poke your nose into other people's business. Otherwise, you will get into trouble. The strong man still had his hands behind his back and looked at Zhuowen with disdain. Chapter 2277. Cao Jiyuan senior brother, save me. The worry in the woman's eyes grew even denser, and she couldn't help but transmit her voice to Zhuowen again. It was this moment of distraction that allowed the thin man to seize the opportunity and shatter the azure phoenix with a single punch before grabbing the woman with his right hand. Haha, Lord Ju Ren, it's all thanks to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to capture this bitch. The thin man laughed heartily as he carried the ashen-faced woman over to the strong man's side. Even though the thin man had noticed Zhuowen, he didn't pay much attention to him. Even though the young man in white was at the 6th step of the void sky realm as well, he knew that the young man in white was still slightly inferior to the strong man by his side. Moreover, it was 2 against 1, so the thin man didn't think that the young man in white would try anything funny. The strong man smiled, and then he looked indifferently at Zhuowen and said, "You'd better scram. Otherwise, don't blame me for making a move." The thin man gazed at Zhuowen with disdain and said, "You're just a trash coward." Scram. The woman had a wooden expression on her face. At this moment, she didn't ask for help anymore. She knew that she had been captured by the thin man, so it would be useless no matter how she begged for help. The young man in white was no match for the 2 of them. "Do you dare to repeat what you said just now?" Zhuowen's expression was calm as he gazed at the thin man in silence. It was like he was looking at a dead man. The thin man still gazed at Zhuowen with disdain and said slowly, "What? Are you still unconvinced? I'm being too kind by calling you a trash coward. As far as I'm concerned, you're worse than a coward." Zhuowen didn't say anything. He just raised his right hand, and surging divine energy formed a terrifying hurricane that swept towards the thin man. The thin man clearly hadn't expected Zhuowen to suddenly attack, so he couldn't react for a moment. On the other hand, the strong man by his side reacted extremely quickly. He roared furiously and blasted out a hand made of divine energy as well. Bang! Suddenly, the divine power hurricane and the divine power hand collided. Then, the divine power hand collapsed in the blink of an eye, and the divine power hurricane engulfed the skinny man. A miserable scream rang out as the thin man's body dissipated bit by bit in the divine power hurricane. In the end, Not even his bones were left. He was completely dead. Furthermore, Zhuowen had controlled his strength perfectly. He did not harm the cow woman in the slightest. At this moment, the strong man's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He could only watch as the thin man was killed in front of him, and he was powerless to do anything. The muscular man was no fool. From the way Zhuowen had killed the skinny man in an instant, he could tell that the strength of the white-clothed youth in front of him was much more terrifying than his own. Thinking of this, the strong man did not hesitate and immediately crushed the talisman in his hand. His whole body turned into a black light and instantly disappeared. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. This strong man's speed was not slow. No wonder he could intercept the cow woman. He must have relied on the escape talisman in his hand to achieve this. However, not long after the strong man left, a bloody light swept out from the darkness of the starry sky. The moment the strong man passed by the bloody light, he was caught off guard and was immediately pierced between his eyebrows by the bloody light. He fell to the ground, dead. The battle ended too quickly. Before the cow woman could even react, the thin man and the strong man had already fallen to the ground, dead. When the cow woman's gaze finally fell on Zhuowen, she immediately felt deep respect for him. She cupped her hands towards Zhuowen and thanked him. Many thanks for Senior's help. My name is Cao Zhiyuan. I am a direct descendant of the cow family in the old Orchid Star River. Zhuowen nodded and didn't say anything else. He was unfamiliar with this place and didn't have any concept of the cow clan that Cao Zhiyuan spoke of. The space-time quicksand river is not far from the old Orchid Star River. Do you have a specific introduction jade strip to the space-time quicksand river? Zhuowen asked lightly. The reason why Zhuowen saved this woman was because of his character and also because he wanted to ask about the space-time quicksand river. Since this woman could be chased by the so-called killing shark fleet, her background should not be small. She should know a lot about the space-time quicksand river. Cao Zhiyuan looked at Zhuowen in surprise and asked, Senior, are you planning to enter the space-time quicksand river? Yes. Zhuowen did not hide anything. Senior, the space-time quicksand river is not a place you can enter at any time. The space-time quicksand river is now under the control of the quicksand family. The quicksand family has a very strict control over the number of cultivators who can enter the space-time quicksand river. Only cultivators approved by them can enter the space-time quicksand river for experience, Cao Zhiyuan said. Approval? What kind of approval is needed? Zhuowen frowned slightly. He did not expect that the space-time quicksand river was controlled by the so-called quicksand family. Moreover, one needed to be approved to enter, which made Zhuowen feel somewhat helpless. Is the quicksand family also in the space-time quicksand river? I remember that the space-time quicksand river is an ownerless object. Why is it controlled by the quicksand family? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Cao Zhiyuan said cautiously, Senior may not know, but 1,000 years ago, anyone could enter the space-time quicksand river. However, 1,000 years ago, the space-time quicksand river began to collapse for some unknown reason. Although the speed of collapse was not fast, this collapse flooded the entrance to the space-time quicksand river. In other words, the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed and disappeared. If other cultivators want to enter the space-time quicksand river, they must have an entrance. Otherwise, they can't enter at all. The quicksand family has mastered the only way to enter the space-time quicksand river. Therefore, the space-time quicksand river is now under the control of the quicksand family. The quicksand family is not in the space-time quicksand river, but in the Gulan celestial river. Moreover, they are the most powerful force in the Gulan celestial river. As for the space-time quicksand river, due to the influence of the space-time quicksand river, the entire space-time is dislocated. Therefore, it is not suitable for living there. Hearing Cao Zhiyuan's words, Zhuowen nodded. Although he did not know much about the space-time quicksand river, he knew that since the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed 1,000 years ago, he could only rely on the quicksand family to enter the space-time quicksand river. Senior, if you really want to go to the space-time quicksand river, you must go to the quicksand family. Why don't you come with me to the Gulan celestial river first? When the time comes, I can take you to the quicksand family. Cao Jiyuan said cautiously. Zhuowen glanced at Cao Jiyuan and nodded without hesitation. Then, I will have to trouble you, Miss Cao. Chapter 2278. Xiong the Gulan Galaxy was located in the east of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain. It was the largest galaxy in the east of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain. Even in the entire Heavenly Domain, the Gulan Galaxy was considered one of the top. Along the way, Zhuowen heard a lot about the Gulan Galaxy and the Six Desires Heavenly Domain from Cao Jiyuan. Zhuowen learned from Cao Jiyuan that the Six Desires Heavenly Domain had at least 3 Void Sky 9 Steps cultivators, and this was only on the surface. As for how many Void Sky 9 Steps cultivators there were, Cao Jiyuan was not sure. It was only now that Zhuowen realized that the overall strength of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain was many times stronger than that of the Great Brahma Domain. It should be known that the Great Brahma Domain only had one elite that had reached the Void Sky 9 Steps, while the Six Desires Heavenly Domain had at least 3. Of course, Zhuowen also guessed that there were at least 3 Void Sky 9th Step experts in the Hua Xia Heavenly Domain. They were the Supreme Pure One, the Supreme Pure One, and the Jade Pure One. These 3 Pure Ones were the mainstays of the Hua Xia Heavenly Domain. Zhuowen knew that the 3 of them must be Void Sky 9th Step experts. At the same time, Zhuowen also inquired about the Quicksand family. He discovered that the Quicksand family's strongest expert, Quang Li, was a half-step Void Sky 9th Step expert. At the same time, Quang Li controlled the method to enter the river of space-time quicksand. The so-called recognition was actually the recognition of the Quicksand family's strongest expert, Quang Li. As long as Quang Li allowed someone to enter the river of space-time quicksand, that person would naturally be qualified to enter the river of space-time quicksand. Quang Li had the sole right to decide. Back then, besides the Gulan Galaxy, Zhuowen also asked about the Six Desires Palace. However, the Six Desires Palace was more mysterious than Zhuowen had imagined. Cao Jiyuan didn't know much about the Six Desires Palace. As for Moyan Wushang, who had joined the Six Desires Palace, he naturally didn't get any clues. Zhuowen had promised Moyan Wushang that he would definitely go to the Six Desires Palace to find her in the future. Now that Zhuowen had been inexplicably transferred to the Six Desires Heavenly Domain, he naturally had to make a trip to the Six Desires Palace. However, before going to the Six Desires Palace, Zhuowen planned to go to the river of space-time quicksand to find the second key. He was really afraid that Ma Yujie, that fatty, would beat him to it. Although Ma Yujie didn't know that the second space-time key was in the river of space-time quicksand, the fatty was very smart. He would definitely go to the river of space-time quicksand to try his luck. This guy's array Dao level was too terrifying. He might really be able to find the space-time divine key in the river of time and space quicksand. Therefore, it was better for Zhuowen to deal with this matter as soon as possible. Another 5 days later, Zhuowen's airship arrived at the Gulan Celestial River. The flying ship stopped at the plaza designated by Cao Jiyuan in advance. When the 2 of them walked down from the flying ship, a group of cultivators dressed in the same uniform immediately walked over and knelt on one knee in front of Cao Jiyuan. This subordinate respectfully welcomes young miss must have been frightened on the way. In front of the group, an old man with long hair knelt on one knee in front of Cao Jiyuan. Cao Jiyuan looked at the long-haired old man in front of her. Her jade-like nose unconsciously wrinkled as she said, "Xiong, why are you here? Where is my father?" The long-haired old man still knelt on one knee and said indifferently, "Second master went out to take care of some matters. He hasn't returned yet." Cao Jiyuan frowned deeply and said in a deep voice, "Where did he go?" The long-haired old man replied, "This subordinate doesn't know. Second master didn't say where he was going before he left. How about this, young miss, follow this old servant back first. The patriarch and the others miss you very much." Zhuowen stood to the side and silently looked at the long-haired old man. Although the old man's behavior was not inappropriate, his tone was somewhat stiff and cold. He wasn't particularly obedient to Cao Jiyuan. Zhuowen didn't know much about the Cao family's matters. However, Cao Jiyuan had told him that the Cao family's patriarch was her uncle and her father's elder brother. It was said that Cao Jiyuan's uncle didn't inherit the position of patriarch from Cao Jiyuan's grandfather. Instead, it was Cao Jiyuan's father who gave the position to her uncle. When Cao Jiyuan's father was young, he was very talented and was highly regarded by Cao Jiyuan's grandfather. Before her grandfather passed away, he passed the position of patriarch to Cao Jiyuan's father in advance. However, her father didn't want the position of patriarch. Later on, for unknown reasons, her father was ambushed and his foundation was destroyed. Although his cultivation didn't drop, he didn't make any progress and was later surpassed by her uncle. Cao Jiyuan's father was a person with strong self-esteem. When he saw that his cultivation wasn't as good as her uncle's, he decisively gave the position of patriarch to her uncle. However, after her uncle took over the position of the head of the household, his attitude towards them immediately became cold, and he even deliberately alienated them from this faction. After all, Cao Jiyuan's experience was less than Zhuowen's. However, Zhuowen's heart was as clear as a mirror. The murderous shark fleet was an organization of assassins. Since the murderous shark fleet had found Cao Jiyuan, there must be someone who wanted to kill her. Who exactly wanted to kill Cao Jiyuan? Zhuowen felt that Cao Jiyuan's uncle was more suspicious. After all, Cao Jiyuan's grandfather had passed the position of patriarch to Cao Jiyuan's father. Therefore, Cao Jiyuan's uncle held a grudge against Cao Jiyuan's father. Although Cao Jiyuan's father had passed the position of patriarch to Cao Jiyuan's uncle, it could be seen from her uncle's various actions that he wasn't a magnanimous person. Therefore, Cao Jiyuan's uncle was the most likely person to make a move on Cao Jiyuan. Of course, these were all Zhuowen's guesses. He didn't have any evidence, so it was hard to judge. Cao Jiyuan saw that the long-haired old man had said everything and didn't say anything else. She turned around and was about to introduce Zhuowen when the long-haired old man interrupted her. "Young miss, I know this person. Previously, you mentioned this person in the message. You can go back first. This old servant will make appropriate arrangements for this person. After all, he saved your life," the long-haired old man said indifferently. Cao Jiyuan's charming face flushed red. This long-haired old man was really too arrogant. He actually dared to speak to her like this. Just as Cao Jiyuan was about to flare up, Zhuowen extended his hand and stopped her. "Miss Jiyuan, you can go back first. When the time comes, we'll meet at the Cao family," Zhuowen said with a smile. Cao Jiyuan glanced at Zhuowen with some astonishment. Although she felt that there was something wrong with this long-haired old man, she couldn't tell what exactly was wrong. Moreover, since Zhuowen had spoken, she couldn't say anything else. "Xiong Yuan, Big Brother Zhuo is my esteemed guest. You'd better make proper arrangements. Otherwise, this young miss will hold you accountable." Cao Jiyuan's beautiful eyes coldly glanced at the long-haired old man. Then, she bid farewell to Zhuowen and left under the lead of 2 guards. It was obvious that she was going to meet the patriarch of the Cao family. After Cao Jiyuan left, the long-haired old man, Xiong Yuan, stood up. His gaze was somewhat indifferent as he glanced at Zhuowen and said, "Friend, thank you for saving my family's young miss. Now, follow me. In order to express our Cao family's gratitude, I have something to give you as a reward for this kindness." As he spoke, Xiong Yuan walked forward without looking back. Zhuowen frowned as he looked at the arrogant long-haired old man. However, he quickly smiled and followed. Chapter 2279. Prison. After the long-haired old man brought Zhuowen to a remote dead end, he turned to Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Your strength is not bad. It's rare for a rogue cultivator to reach Void Sky 6th step. Now, I'll give you a chance that others can't even dream of. Join our Cao family and pledge your loyalty to our Cao family." After saying that, the long-haired old man put his hands behind his back and revealed an arrogant expression. It was as if his words were the biggest charity to Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked at the long-haired old man in front of him with a funny expression. This old man was only at the early stage of Void Sky 7th step. In front of Zhuowen, he was nothing. Yet, he dared to boast so shamelessly in front of Zhuowen. Of course, if it was an ordinary Void Sky 6 steps cultivator, they might really be afraid in front of this long-haired old man. In addition, this old man was backed by the powerful cow family of the old orchid galaxy. However, Zhuowen wouldn't. Not to mention that the cow family couldn't compare to the quicksand family. Even if it was the quicksand family, Zhuowen wouldn't be afraid. Now, Zhuowen's strength was enough to instantly kill any Void Sky 8th step cultivator. He was close to a half-step Void Sky 9th step cultivator. The strongest person in the quicksand family was a half-step Void Sky 9th step cultivator. Zhuowen might not be afraid of the quicksand family, so why would he be afraid of this cow family? What? Hurry up and give me an answer. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Our cow family is powerful enough to rank in the top 5 in the ancient Orchid Star River. You'd better be sensible. The long-haired old man saw that Zhuowen had fallen silent and frowned. He immediately released the pressure in his body, preparing to use it to intimidate Zhuowen. Zhuowen stood boldly, unaffected by the long-haired old man. He said indifferently, "Scram. Your cow family isn't qualified for me to serve." The long-haired old man didn't look surprised. His goal wasn't to make Zhuowen join the cow family, but to give him a reason to kill. Since Zhuowen had rejected him, the long-haired old man naturally had no scruples. "Then I'm really sorry. No one can refuse the cow family's invitation and leave alive." As the long-haired old man spoke, he slowly pulled out the divine sword from his waist. However, when he was halfway through pulling it out, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. His right hand had lost all feeling. When his gaze landed on his right hand had been sliced off by a blood sword at some point in time. The half-unsheathed divine sword had also fallen to the ground. The long-haired old man was stunned. He didn't even notice when the blood sword appeared beside him or when it cut off his right arm. He didn't notice any of this at all. The long-haired elder wasn't stupid. He knew that the reason for this was because the blood sword was too terrifying, much more powerful than him. "You're wrong. I rejected your cow clan's invitation, but I will still leave here alive." Zhuowen spoke this time. The long-haired old man stiffly turned his head and looked at the white-clothed young man slowly walking over. The fear in his eyes grew heavier and heavier. The long-haired old man wanted to call out, but he found that he couldn't make a sound. Then, he lost his last bit of consciousness. Zhuowen silently looked at the long-haired old man who had been beheaded by the blood sword. If the long-haired old man had spoken nicely to him, Zhuowen wouldn't have killed him. Unfortunately, the long-haired old man didn't know his limits. Not only did he not give Zhuowen any rewards, he even wanted to kill him. Since that was the case, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't let anyone bully him. He used a thunderous method to kill the long-haired old man. The battle on Zhuowen's side had happened too quickly. It had already ended before the shockwaves of the battle could even spread. After all, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. After putting away the long-haired old man's spirit ring, Zhuowen walked towards the cow family. Although he wasn't very clear about the internal conflicts of the cow family, he knew that Cao Jiyuan's return to the cow family boded ill rather than well. Moreover, Cao Jiyuan was the only person he knew in the old Orchid Galaxy. Naturally, Zhuowen couldn't just stand by and watch her die. Moreover, Zhuowen hadn't asked Cao Jiyuan about the details of the Quicksand family. No matter what, Zhuowen would definitely help Cao Jiyuan. In the cow family's hall, the patriarch, Cao Shenbing, was sitting at the head of the table. The upper echelons of the cow family were sitting on both sides of the hall. However, the atmosphere in the hall was very solemn and tense. The upper echelons on both sides of the hall didn't dare to make a sound. They were carefully looking at Cao Shenbing, who was sitting at the head of the table. Cao Jiyuan was led by 2 guards to the front of the hall. She raised her pretty face and stared at Cao Shenbing with her clear eyes. She didn't say anything. Cao Shenbing also looked at Cao Jiyuan silently. However, this silence didn't last long. Cao Shenbing opened his mouth. "Jiyuan, Uncle wants to tell you a piece of unfortunate news," Cao Shenbing said indifferently. Cao Jiyuan's beautiful eyes narrowed as an ominous feeling arose in her heart. However, she didn't say anything. Instead, she stared at Cao Shenbing, waiting for him to continue. "Your father betrayed our cow family. Therefore, according to the family's rules, I sent him to the Blackwater prison. You probably didn't know about this, right? Cao Shenbing continued. Cao Jiyuan's delicate body trembled. She automatically ignored the fact that her father had betrayed the family. The only thing in her mind was the Blackwater prison. The Blackwater prison was the most terrifying dungeon of the Cao family. Before a prisoner was sent to the Blackwater prison, their body would be cut into thousands of pieces. After their body was drenched in blood, they would be tied up in the Blackwater prison. However, this wasn't the most important thing. The most terrifying thing was the Blackwater prison. This was because the Blackwater prison's Blackwater prison was filled with countless black insects. These black insects were only the size of a fingernail. However, they loved to drill into a person's wounds and enter the person's internal organs through the wounds. These insects weren't fatal. Their only use was to stimulate all the nerves in the person's body, causing the person's pain to be magnified by thousands of times. It made the prisoner feel as if he was better off dead. In the past, the Blackwater prison was used to imprison the Cao family's mortal enemies. Moreover, most of the prisoners couldn't withstand the pain in the Blackwater prison and chose to commit suicide. Cao Jiyuan couldn't hold back her tears as she hysterically shouted at Cao Shenbing, you've gone too far. The Blackwater prison only imprisons the Cao family's mortal enemies. My father is a direct descendant of the Cao family. How can you treat him like this? Cao Xuanbing's face darkened. He didn't expect Cao Jiyuan to be so bold as to call him by his name in front of everyone. She didn't put him in her eyes at all. Your father colluded with the Cao family's mortal enemy, the Bakufu. Fortunately, I discovered it in time. Otherwise, our Cao family would be in danger. I'm already being merciful by not killing a scum like your father. And you, how dare you call me by my name? You must know about your father's betrayal, but you didn't report it. I'm afraid you're an accomplice. Men, capture this unfilial son and imprison him in the Blackwater prison as well. Chapter 2280. Indenture Contract Hong. Cao Jiyuan naturally wouldn't sit still and wait for death. With a wave of her jade-like hand, blue energy condensed into a blue luan and blasted away the two guards who were about to take her down. Cao Shenbing, who was walking at the head of the group, coldly snorted as he stretched out his right hand towards Cao Jiyuan. The moment the blue luan in front of Cao Jiyuan came into contact with Cao Xuanbing's hand, it immediately dissipated into countless blue lights. Cao Jiyuan even spat out a mouthful of blood. Her expression was dim, and she looked dispirited. Take her away and imprison her in the Blackwater prison. Cao Xuanbing's eyes were cold as he looked at the guards who had just been blasted away by Cao Jiyuan. The two guards were submissive. They hurriedly nodded their heads and said yes. Then, they grabbed the weak and heavily injured Cao Jiyuan and took her away. The hall was as silent as cicadas in winter. No one came out to speak. It was terrifyingly quiet. Cao Feng and his daughter Cao Jiyuan are suspected of colluding with the shogunate, so this patriarch will imprison them both in the Blackwater prison. I believe no one has any objections, right? Cao Shenbing looked around and said coldly. Patriarch's approach is correct. This kind of traitor must not be tolerated and should be severely punished. Yes, Cao Feng's character is terrible. I think the Blackwater prison's punishment for him is too light. There was a burst of agreement in the hall. Cao Shenbing sat at the head of the table, his eyes narrowed as the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Outside the Cao family's gate, Zhuowen stood in front of it and looked at the magnificent mansion in front of him, clicking his tongue in amazement. The Cao family's mansion could definitely be regarded as magnificent, not the slightest bit inferior to the great Brahma Starfield sects like the Dark Fantasy sect and High Heaven sect. When Zhuowen intended to use his divine sense to explore the mansion, he found that his divine sense was blocked. Fortunately, Zhuowen's divine sense was powerful enough to not disturb the Cao family's barrier. Of course, with Zhuowen's current powerful divine sense, he could completely break the Cao family's barrier by force, but Zhuowen did not come here to cause trouble. At least, he had to do a good job on the surface. Who are you? Outside the door, The two guards looked at Zhuo Wen walking over with fear. Their expressions were reverent. They weren't hotheads, so they could naturally feel the aura on Zhuo Wen's body. They knew that this white-clothed youth before them was absolutely not an ordinary person. I am Miss Cao Jiyuan's friend. Today, she has invited me to enter the Cao clan. Could I trouble you to inform her? Zhuo Wen said casually. When the two guards heard this, a strange look appeared in their eyes, but they quickly regained their composure. Please wait a moment, I will inform the patriarch immediately, one of the guards politely said before entering the mansion. Zhuo Wen's eyes flashed. The strange look in the eyes of the two guards did not escape Zhuo Wen's eyes, but Zhuo Wen did not care. After all, Cao Jiyuan was a direct descendant of the Cao family, and her status in the Cao family was not low. Zhuo Wen knew that nothing would happen to Cao Jiyuan in a short period of time. It was just that Zhuo Wen despised the Cao family's actions. From Xiong Yuan's actions, it could be seen that the patriarch of the Cao family was not a good person. Not long after, the guard came out. Behind the guard was a middle-aged man with a solemn face. Are you Jiyuan's friend? The middle-aged man glanced at Zhuo Wen and slowly asked. Zhuo Wen frowned. He did not like the middle-aged man's attitude. It was as if someone owed him money. Yes, where is Jiyuan? Why didn't she come out? Zhuo Wen asked indifferently. The middle-aged man glanced at Zhuo Wen and said with a smile, I didn't expect that Jiyuan would get to know a young and promising friend like you outside. Jiyuan is really lucky. Jiyuan has some matters to attend to right now, so it's not convenient for her to come out. Come in with me, I'll bring you to see her. Oh right, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Jiyuan's third uncle, Cao Yuanji. I wonder how you and Jiyuan met. What sect are you from? The middle-aged man started introducing himself as he led the way. Zhuo Wen nodded and said, I'm Zhuo Wen, and I got to know Miss Jiyuan by accident on the way. As for me, I'm only an independent cultivator, and I don't belong to any sect. When Cao Yuanji heard that Zhuo Wen was just a rogue cultivator with no sect, his eyes narrowed slightly as he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. When Cao Yuanji saw that this young man's cultivation had reached the 6th step of the Void Sky Realm, he thought that this young man was a disciple of some powerful force. Now that he knew that this young man was just a rogue cultivator, Cao Yuanji naturally felt a lot more at ease. Cao Yuanji led Zhuo Wen into a rather grand pavilion. He pointed at the empty hall and said, Brother Zhuo, sit in the hall for a while. I'll help you call Jiyuan. Zhuo Wen sneered in his heart. He didn't say anything, but nodded and entered the pavilion. Cao Yuanji looked at Zhuo Wen's back as a sinister smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then, he left the place. Sitting in a rather dark and gloomy hall, Zhuo Wen took out 9 beast bone array discs from his spirit ring. Soon after, he formed a seal with both hands. Immediately, the 9 beast bone array discs emitted a dark black light from their surface, before they entered the hall in 9 different directions. After doing all this, Zhuo Wen leisurely sat on his seat, as if he was really waiting for Cao Jiyuan. An hour later, Cao Yuanji came to the pavilion once again. Cao Jiyuan brought a middle-aged man with her. This middle-aged man looked quite similar to Cao Yuanji. He was even older than Cao Yuanji. Whether it was his temperament or strength, he was much stronger than Cao Yuanji. Cao Yuanji followed beside this middle-aged man with a respectful and reverent expression. Obviously, this middle-aged man's status in the Cao family was not low. Little brother, I'm the patriarch of the Cao family, Cao Shenbing. I heard that you're Jiyuan's friend. The middle-aged man walked in front of Cao Yuanji. As soon as he entered the pavilion, he laughed out loud. His voice contained a warm tone. Zhuo Wen smiled slightly and said, So it's the patriarch of the Cao family. I am indeed Miss Jiyuan's friend. Just now, this person said that he was going to look for Miss Jiyuan. Why didn't Miss Jiyuan come, and instead blew the patriarch of the Cao family here? Cao Shenbing didn't care about Zhuo Wen's attitude. Instead, he said with a pleasant expression, It's like this. Jiyuan's father is heavily injured. She's worried about her father, so she went to her father's place first. So, she's unable to come see you, Brother Zhuo. Speaking up to here, Cao Xianbing took out a yellowed piece of paper from his bosom and passed it to Zhuowen. Brother Zhuo, I heard from Jiyuan that you're a loose cultivator. You were able to cultivate to the 6th step void stage with your identity as a loose cultivator. It can be seen that your natural talent is extraordinary. If you're able to join a great power, then your accomplishments will definitely reach a higher level. Zhuowen glanced at the piece of paper in Cao Xuanbing's hand and sneered in his heart. This piece of paper was a contract. Zhuowen roughly scanned it with his divine sense and roughly understood the contents. The general content of this contract was for Zhuowen to join the Cao family. The Cao family would focus on nurturing him, and in return, Zhuowen had to unconditionally obey the Cao family's arrangements and follow their orders. Chapter 2281. Suppression. Zhuowen received the contract, and then he raised his head to look at Cao Xianbing as he said, Miss Jiyuan asked you to give this contract to me? Cao Xianbing was still smiling. No, it's just that our Cao family loves talented people. Brother Zhuo, you're a rogue cultivator. Joining our Cao family will only make things better for you. You'll also be a member of the Cao family in the future, so it'll be more convenient for you to do things outside. I see. Thank you for your kindness, Patriarch Cao. I'll keep this contract for now. I need to think about it, Zhuowen said calmly. The smile on Cao Xuanbing's face gradually disappeared. He said indifferently, Zhuo Xiaoyu, that's not good. Our Cao family is one of the top 5 forces in the Gulan galaxy. You'll only benefit from joining our Cao family. Sign this contract now. The smile in Zhuowen's eyes disappeared. He slowly stood up and looked at Cao Xianbing indifferently. Patriarch Cao, are you trying to force me to sign this contract? Cao Xuanbing's face became colder and colder. Before he could say anything, Cao Yuanji sneered, Zhuo Xiaoyu, we're not forcing you. We're just thinking for you. Otherwise, do you think you'll have such an opportunity in the future? This is a rare opportunity. You should cherish it. Otherwise, you'll be killed. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. This Cao Yuanji dared to threaten him in public. He was too unscrupulous. Did he really think that Zhuowen was a pushover? Yes, Yuanji is right. You won't get a chance every time. You'd better cherish it. Cao Xianbing said calmly. Zhuowen was so angry that he laughed. He took out the contract again and tore it to pieces in front of Cao Xianbing and Cao Yuanji. Cao Xianbing and Cao Yuanji thought that Zhuowen had changed his mind when he took out the contract. However, their faces darkened when they saw Zhuowen tear the contract in front of them. You're courting death. Cao Yuanji was furious. He waved his sleeve and threw a punch at Zhuowen. The surging divine power was like the endless water pressure at the bottom of the sea. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. Originally, he wanted to talk nicely. Unfortunately, the 2 old men of the Cao clan were really unreasonable. Since that was the case, they couldn't blame Zhuowen for being impolite. Cao Yuanji's cultivation was slightly stronger than Xiong Yuan's. He should be at the peak of the 7th step void sky stage, while Cao Xianbing, the patriarch of the Cao family, had already reached the 8th step void sky stage. After Cao Yuanji attacked, Cao Xianbing didn't do anything. Instead, he placed his hands behind his back and looked coldly at Zhuowen. As far as he was concerned, Zhuowen was dead for sure. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the 6th step of the void sky realm, and the gap between him and Cao Yuanji wasn't small. Bang! A bloody light suddenly shot out from Zhuowen's spirit ring and fiercely hit Cao Yuanji's palm. Divine power surged out like waves crashing against the shore. Then, Cao Yuanji let out a muffled groan and retreated dozens of steps. The bloody light was also sent flying by Cao Yuanji's attack and landed beside Zhuowen. Needless to say, the bloody light was the Blood Immortal Sword. Although the Blood Immortal Sword's progress was fast, its strength was only at the peak of the 7th step void sky stage, which was about the same as Cao Yuanji's. Therefore, the two were evenly matched. What a powerful divine weapon. Cao Shenbing waved his sleeve and immediately stopped Cao Yuanji's retreating figure. He looked at the blood immortal sword floating beside Zhuowen in surprise, but soon, the surprise in his eyes was replaced by greed. Cao Xuanbing's vision wasn't low. He could tell at a glance that the bloody sword was extremely powerful. It was comparable to the peak of the 7th step Void Sky stage. If he could obtain such a bloody sword, it would be equivalent to obtaining a peak 7th step Void Sky stage expert. Haha. Zhuo Xiaoyu, I'll give you one more chance. Give the bloody sword to us, and we'll let you leave the Cao family. What do you think? Cao Shenbing laughed. His eyes were full of arrogance, as if his words were letting Zhuowen take advantage of him. Idiot. Zhuowen didn't bother with Cao Shenbing. He formed a seal with both hands. Suddenly, a terrifying wave of energy erupted from the four corners of the hall. Then, 9 beast bone array discs flew out from the four corners and hovered above the hall, rotating violently. Trap and kill array? Cao Xuanbing's eyes narrowed. He punched the array at the edge of the array, but unfortunately, his punch couldn't break through the array. Clearly, it was a level 8 trap and kill array. Cao Xuanbing's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He knew that the white-clothed young man in front of him was a level 8 divine array master. Even the Cao family didn't have such a divine array master. It was unwise to offend such a divine array master. Zhuowen immediately activated the trap and kill array. Instantly, terrifying array attacks poured down like raindrops. Cao Shenbing and Cao Yuanji were immediately exhausted. Zhuowen, on the other hand, took out the bloody celestial sword. With a flash of bloody light, it flew toward Cao Yuanji and Cao Shenbing. Bang! Cao Yuanji was already on par with the blood immortal sword. Now, he was also busy dealing with the trap and kill formation around him. When the blood immortal sword came at him, his hasty defense was of no use. In the end, the sword pierced his vital part. Cao Yuanji spat out a mouthful of blood. He was severely injured and could no longer withstand the power of the trap and kill array. He was instantly shredded into a bloody mist. Wait, this is the Cao family. How dare you kill people in the Cao family? Are you looking for death? Cao Xuanbing's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was secretly regretting his actions. If he had known that the white-clothed young man was so terrifying, he wouldn't have provoked him. Although Cao Shenbing was an 8th step Void Heaven expert, he was only at the early stage of the 8th step Void Heaven expert. Moreover, Zhuowen's level 8 Death Trap array was extremely terrifying. Even Cao Shenbing found it difficult to deal with it. He knew that if he continued to delay, he would die in this Death Trap array sooner or later. Zhuowen completely ignored Cao Xuanbing's words. Instead, he formed a seal with his right hand and suddenly tapped the center of Cao Xuanbing's forehead. Zhuowen no longer concealed his terrifying pressure, and it swept over like a tidal wave. Cao Shenbing exclaimed in his heart. Although Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the level 6 step Void Sky, his aura was no weaker than Cao Xuanbing's. It was definitely not an aura that a level 6 step Void Sky cultivator could possess. Bang! Cao Shenbing was only able to block one of Zhuowen's moves. Then, Zhuowen's fist landed on his chest. Cao Shenbing spat out a mouthful of blood and couldn't hold on any longer. He was sent flying and fell to the ground. Who are you? Cao Shenbing fell to the ground. His face was as pale as snow. He raised his head and looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. He didn't expect this white-clothed young man to have such terrifying strength. He clearly knew that with his current strength, he was no match for this white-clothed young man. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and put away the beast bone array disc. He looked down at Cao Shenbing indifferently. Although the strength of Zhuowen's main body was far inferior to Devour's doppelganger, after absorbing the true dragon's blood, his physical strength was comparable to Devour's. Coupled with the trap and kill array, he easily defeated Cao Shenbing. Chapter 2282. Blackwater Prison. Due to the short duration of the battle and the fact that it took place within the death trap array set up by Zhuowen, the Cao clan wasn't alerted. Zhuowen slowly walked over to Cao Shenbing and said indifferently, "I have no enmity with your Cao clan. I originally intended to talk nicely with you, but you're being overbearing. Tell me, where's Miss Jiyuan? Cao Xuanbing's body trembled and he fell silent. He now knew that the gap between him and the young man before him was too great. If he dared to make the slightest move, he would be killed immediately. Zhuoan knew that Cao Xianbing wouldn't say anything, so he didn't say anything. He suddenly placed his right hand on Cao Xuanbing's head and began to search his soul. Although Zhuoan's cultivation was slightly inferior to Cao Xuanbing's, his soul was much more powerful than Cao Xuanbing's. Coupled with the fact that Cao Xianbing was heavily injured and powerless to resist, it wasn't difficult for Zhuoan to search his soul. Zhuoan's gaze turned cold after he checked Cao Xuanbing's memories. Cao Xianbing was truly vicious. He actually threw his own younger brother and niece into the Blackwater prison for groundless crimes. Zhuoan had obtained all of Cao Xuanbing's memories, so he naturally knew that Cao Xianbing had set up all of this to frame Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan. His goal was to completely eliminate his second brother, who was a threat to his position as the patriarch of the Cao clan, as well as everyone related to him. Zhuoan also learned about the Blackwater prison from Cao Xuanbing's memories. He knew that the Blackwater prison was extremely vicious. "Take me to the Blackwater prison if you don't want to die," Zhuoan said coldly. Cao Xuanbing's body trembled. He hurriedly said respectfully, "Junior dares not. Junior will take Senior to the Blackwater prison right away." At this moment, Cao Xuanbing's heart was filled with bitterness. The young man before him was extremely powerful, and even his soul was terrifying. Cao Xianbing had actually searched his soul so easily just now. He knew that it would be extremely easy for this person to destroy his soul. Cao Xianbing didn't have the slightest bit of hope when facing such a terrifying expert. As he spoke, Cao Xianbing respectfully led Zhuoan into the depths of the Cao family. Along the way, the members of the Cao family all bowed to Cao Xianbing. At the same time, they looked at the young man in white behind Cao Xianbing with surprise. As long as one was not a fool, one could tell that Cao Xianbing was extremely respectful to the white-clothed young man behind him. Many members of the Cao family were guessing Zhuoan's background. Soon, they arrived at the Blackwater prison. Cao Xianbing stood outside the gate and pointed at a huge black mountain in front of them. "Senior, the Blackwater prison is right ahead. Bring me in. If anything happens to the kite, don't blame me for being impolite," Zhuoan said indifferently. Cao Xuanbing's heart skipped a beat. He groaned inwardly. He hoped that Cao Jiyuan hadn't been punished yet. Otherwise, he would really be in trouble. Thinking of this, Cao Xianbing hurriedly brought Zhuoan into the Black Mountain. Cao Xianbing was the head of the Cao family, so he didn't encounter any obstacles when entering the Blackwater prison. The interior of the Blackwater prison was a black stone passageway that extended in all directions. Cao Xianbing walked very quickly and arrived at a stone hall. At this moment, the stone hall was heavily guarded. There were groups of guards guarding it. In the middle of the stone hall, a pale woman was hung up. Zhuoan took a closer look. Wasn't this woman Cao Jiyuan? Head of the Cao family, why are you here? A bald man with a large saber came before Cao Xianbing respectfully. His eyes were filled with confusion. Slap. Cao Xianbing slapped the bald man's face, knocking him to the ground. "How dare you tie up my niece here? Do you not respect me, the head of the Cao family?" Cao Xianbing shouted himself hoarse. The bald man was stunned. He thought to himself, "Isn't this your order, head of the Cao family?" Just as he was about to argue, Cao Xianbing slapped him again. This time, the bald man's chin was cracked. The poor bald man didn't even know what happened before he fell unconscious on the ground. "Senior, it's my subordinate's fault. He actually locked up Jiyuan behind my back. If Senior is still angry, I'll kill him for you." Cao Xianbing turned around and cupped his hands towards Zhuoan with a flattering smile. Cao Xuanbing's humble attitude shocked everyone in the stone hall. Even Cao Jiyuan, who was hung up, was shocked. Everyone in the Cao family knew how strong Cao Xuanbing's personality was. No one dared to disobey Cao Xianbing, and Cao Xianbing wouldn't allow anyone to disobey him. It was even more impossible for him to be so humble in front of others. But now, Cao Shenbing was actually acting so submissive in front of a young white-clothed youth in front of everyone. This truly shocked everyone. Cao Jiyuan's beautiful eyes finally landed on the white-clothed young man. Especially when she saw his face, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Big brother Zhuo, you." Cao Jiyuan had mixed feelings. She knew that Zhuoan was quite strong and had killed the experts of the shark-slaughtering fleet. However, whether it was the thin man or the strong man, their cultivation didn't exceed the 6th step of the Void Sky stage. Zhuoan's cultivation was only at the 6th step of the Void Sky stage. The gap between him and Cao Shenbing, who was at the 8th step of the Void Sky stage, was not small. But now, Cao Shenbing was speaking so humbly to Zhuoan. Cao Jiyuan knew that there was only one possibility, and that was that this Zhuoan was definitely stronger than Cao Shenbing. Otherwise, Cao Shenbing wouldn't have shown such a respectful expression. Zhuoan glanced at Cao Shenbing indifferently. He knew that this old man was putting on an act for him to see. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and put Jiyuan down." Cao Shenbing saw that Zhuoan didn't reply, so he tactfully shouted at the others in the stone hall. After Cao Shenbing shouted, the stone hall immediately became lively. 2 of the soldiers hurriedly stepped forward and put Cao Jiyuan down, then brought her to Cao Shenbing. "Jiyuan, your uncle didn't manage things well and caused you to suffer. How about this? Your uncle won't let you suffer. Whatever compensation you want, your uncle will fulfill your wish." Cao Shenbing looked kindly at Cao Jiyuan. His voice was filled with deep concern. Unfortunately, Cao Jiyuan completely ignored him. She looked at Cao Shenbing and said coldly, "I don't want anything. I only want you to immediately release my father. In the future, my father and I will have nothing to do with your Cao clan." Ever since she found out that Cao Shenbing had schemed to harm her father, no one in the Cao clan had pleaded for her father or said a word of justice. Cao Jiyuan was thoroughly disappointed in the Cao clan. She decided that after saving her father, she would leave the Cao clan. "You heard what Miss Jiyuan said, right? Release her father," Zhuoan said indifferently. Cao Shenbing revealed a difficult expression. However, under Zhuoan's cold gaze, he could only nod and agree. "Come with me." Chapter 2283. Cao Feng. The passageway emitted an unpleasant stench. After about an hour, Cao Shenbing stopped and pointed at the iron fence in front of them. "Second brother is locked in there." At this moment, Zhuoan's gaze passed through the iron fence and landed on a figure hanging on an iron pillar. This figure's hands were chained and hung on the iron pillar. This person's hair was disheveled and his head drooped. He was naked and his body was covered with wounds. Upon closer inspection, there was not a single patch of normal skin. Inside the iron fence, the incomparably black water submerged this person's body from the head down. Zhuoan could clearly see that there were countless black insects in the black water, constantly moving into the wounds on this person's body. This person's head drooped numbly as if he had lost all sense of pain. "Father." Cao Jiyuan's beautiful eyes streamed with tears. When she was about to throw herself at the iron fence, she was stopped by Zhuoan. Zhuoan took out 9 beast bone array discs and placed them in front of the iron fence. The beast bone array discs then arranged themselves into a strange array. Following that, waves of invisible waves appeared on the surface of the iron fence. Finally, the iron fence shattered into pieces. Zhuoan's right hand formed a seal. The black water floating inside the iron fence suddenly dispersed and disappeared. All of it was annihilated by the power of the beast bone array discs. When Cao Shenbing saw Zhuoan's move, the fear in his eyes became even more intense. He was certain that this white-clothed youth in front of him was not an ordinary level 8 divine array master. He knew that he could not afford to offend such an expert. Zhuoan waved his sleeve and gently placed this disheveled figure in front of Cao Jiyuan. At this moment, Zhuoan finally noticed the wounds on this person's body. His gaze couldn't help but freeze. This person's injuries were extremely terrifying. Almost all of the flesh on his body had been gnawed away, leaving only a thin layer of flesh stuck to the bones. Inside the bones, there were all wriggling black insects. Countless of them were wriggling in this person's chest and abdomen, making one's scalp tingle. If this person didn't have a trace of life remaining, Zhuowen would have thought that this person was dead for sure. When Cao Jiyuan saw Cao Feng in such a state, her tears couldn't help but flow down. Cao Xuanbing's eyes flickered. He carefully glanced at Zhuowen, but his heart was pounding. From Cao Xuanbing's point of view, he knew that Cao Feng was basically impossible to save. He was afraid that Cao Jiyuan was blinded by hatred. She would recklessly ask this white-clothed youth to kill Cao Feng. Cao Jiyuan and Cao Feng. Cao Feng was Cao Xuanbing's. Cao Shenbing was Cao Feng's was. Was Cao Shenbing had cows? Shenbing didn't care. And Cao Xuanbing's didn't was Shenbing was of the Shenbing, Cao's Shenbing, and Liu could Cao Feng. Miss Jiyuan, move aside for a moment. Your father can still be saved. Zhuowen said solemnly. Cao Jiyuan, who was originally grief-stricken, was immediately overjoyed after hearing this. Cao was a cow. Cao Feng of course, she. Cao could not Feng to she was she. Cao Jiyuan quickly thanked him and gave up her seat. Zhuowen, on the other hand, had a solemn expression. He had the heavenly domain starry sky essence on him. Cao Feng was not dead yet. As long as he consumed the heavenly domain starry sky essence, he would be able to recover by more than half. The black insects had to be taken out before Zhuowen could help Cao Feng recover. Otherwise, even if he consumed the heavenly domain starry sky essence, it would be useless. Thinking of this, Zhuowen's surging divine soul entered Cao Feng's body like countless tiny tentacles. Then, he used the soul-slaying technique to kill the black insects. Zhuowen's movements were very gentle. He didn't dare to act recklessly. Otherwise, even Cao Feng's life would be annihilated by the soul-slaying technique. After half an hour, the black insects in Cao Feng's body were finally expelled by Zhuowen. Then, Zhuowen took out a drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence from his spirit ring and fed it to Cao Feng. After consuming the heavenly domain starry sky essence, Cao Feng, who was on the brink of death, had his life force rapidly strengthened. His flesh and blood grew back. In less than a quarter of an hour, Cao Feng opened his eyes and looked around in a daze. Father, you're finally awake. Cao Jiyuan threw herself into Cao Feng's arms. Cao Shenbing, who was watching from the side, was shocked. He obviously didn't expect Zhuowen to save Cao Feng in such a short time. I didn't die. Cao Feng muttered to himself. Cao Feng muttered to himself as he hugged Cao Jiyuan. His gaze quickly landed on Cao Shenbing. He didn't get angry, and instead calmly said, Big brother, can you give me an explanation? I don't think I have done anything wrong to the Cao family. Why are you doing this to me? Cao Xuanbing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Cao Feng shook his head and stopped questioning Cao Shenbing. Instead, his gaze fell on Zhuowen. He looked at Zhuowen from head to toe. Then, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Zhuowen. He said, I, Cao Feng, will never forget your kindness in saving my life. Although Cao Feng was on the brink of death, he was still conscious. Therefore, he knew that his life was saved by this young man in white. Zhuowen flicked his sleeve and helped Cao Feng up. He said, Uncle Cao, you don't have to be so polite. Jiyuan is my friend. This is what I should do. As far as Zhuowen was concerned, saving Cao Feng was as easy as lifting a finger. Since he could help, he naturally wouldn't refuse. He knew that it was extremely easy for the young man to kill him. If Cao Feng really agreed, then he would definitely die. Zhuowen paid no attention to the trembling Cao Shenbing. Instead, he looked at Cao Feng and said, You decide. Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan were simply flabbergasted. Obviously, they hadn't expected Cao Shenbing to kneel and beg for mercy just because of a single sentence from Zhuowen. They were trembling with fear. From this, it could be seen that the young man before them was far more terrifying than they'd imagined. Second brother, it's all my fault. Please don't kill me. I'm willing to give up the position of patriarch. Please, I beg this senior. Cao Xianbing immediately kowtowed to Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan when he saw that Zhuowen wasn't moved. Chapter 2284. Eroding Bonzhuowen glanced at Cao Feng in surprise. He didn't expect Cao Feng to be so magnanimous. Cao Xianbing had caused him to be in such a state, yet he still intended to forgive Cao Xianbing. However, this was Cao Feng and Cao Xuanbing's family matter, so Zhuowen didn't intend to interfere. Since that's the case, then forget it. Zhuowen nodded and didn't continue attacking. Instead, he said, "You two can leave later. I still have some matters that I need your help with." Cao Feng hurriedly said, "Senior, please tell us what you need. This junior will do his best to help you. We'll talk about this later." Zhuowen waved his hand. His gaze fell on Cao Xianbing, who wasn't far away, and he said indifferently, "Why aren't you scramming?" Cao Xianbing obediently stood up and left the place in a hurry. As soon as Cao Xianbing left, Zhuowen also left the Blackwater prison with Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan. Zhuowen stood outside the Blackwater prison and looked at it indifferently. Then, he flicked his finger and a divine sword wrapped in violent lightning and fire energy shot out. "Xiao Hei, destroy the Blackwater prison," Zhuowen said in a deep voice. Xiao Hei, who was sitting on the sword's hilt, chuckled. He controlled the Thunderfire sword and turned it into a sword ray. Rumble. The Thunderfire sword slashed out fiercely. Instantly, lightning and fire energy shot out like an endless rain and fell on the Blackwater prison. Xiao Hei's strength grew rapidly. Although Xiao Hei hadn't displayed his true strength, Zhuowen guessed that this guy was at least at the intermediate Void Sky 8 steps Void Sky realm. It was more than enough to destroy the Blackwater prison. Rumble. The lightning and fire energy was too terrifying. The black rocks outside the Blackwater prison were directly melted by the lightning and fire energy. Within 10 breaths, the huge Blackwater prison was completely annihilated into nothingness under the bombardment of the frightening lightning and fire energy. The destruction of the Blackwater prison shocked the entire Cao family. Cao Xianbing, who had left the Blackwater prison, looked at the scene in fear. He was shocked and fearful. The interior of the Blackwater prison was full of restrictions. Even he would have to spend some effort to destroy it. However, the white-clothed young man had destroyed the entire Blackwater prison just by summoning another divine sword. How could Cao Xianbing not know the difference between him and the white-clothed young man? Thinking of this, Cao Xianbing finally let go of the last bit of resistance in his heart. "Let's go." After destroying the Blackwater prison, Zhuowen brought Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan away from the Cao family. The Cao family, on the other hand, was in an uproar. The Blackwater prison had existed since the Cao family's establishment. Now that it was destroyed, it could be said to be an unprecedented matter. The Ancient Orchid restaurant was the most famous restaurant in the Ancient Orchid Celestial River. Zhuowen brought Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan to sit by the window on the second floor of the Ancient Orchid restaurant, silently tasting the restaurant's famous wines and delicacies. Zhuowen put down his wine cup and looked at Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan with a smile. He said, "I have heard of the famous space-time quicksand river. This time, I came to the Gulan galaxy mainly for the space-time quicksand river. However, I heard from Miss Jiyuan that the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed 1,000 years ago. Therefore, it is basically impossible for ordinary people to enter. The only way is through the quicksand family. As for the specific conditions to enter the space-time quicksand river, can the two of you tell me?" Cao Feng was stunned. He immediately reacted and said in a deep voice, "Senior, so you plan to enter the space-time quicksand river? The method to enter the space-time quicksand river is indeed guarded by the quicksand family. However, if you want to enter, you need the permission of the quicksand family's strongest expert." Kwong Li Zhuowen nodded his head. Cao Jiyuan had told him about this before, so he wasn't surprised. "How can I obtain Kwong Li's permission?" Zhuowen continued to ask. Cao Feng's expression became a little awkward as he smiled and said, "Obtaining Kwong Li's permission is actually both simple and difficult." "What do you mean?" Zhuowen asked in surprise. "If you want to enter the space-time quicksand river, you must give Kwong Li a gift. Only something that satisfies Kwong Li can obtain permission to enter the spacetime quicksand river, Cao Jiyuan interjected. Hearing this, a strange light flashed across Zhuowen's eyes. He had always thought that obtaining Kwong Li's permission would be some kind of trial or test, but he never expected that it would actually be a gift. The more valuable the gift, the better. Even though Zhuowen felt it was very strange, he still asked the question in his heart. There should be a standard for giving a gift, right? However, Cao Feng shook his head and said, Kwong Li's temperament is rather strange and temperamental. The more valuable the gift, the better it is to his taste, the better it is. If it happens to be something that Kwong Li needs, even a level 1 divine medicine might be approved. If it doesn't suit his taste, even a level 8 divine medicine might not necessarily be approved. Zhuowen nodded when he heard this, and then he said, I hope Miss Jiyuan and Uncle Cao Feng can lead me over to the Quicksand clan. Cao Feng nodded. After he found out that Zhuowen wanted to enter the spacetime quicksand river, Cao Ji knew that Zhuowen definitely wanted to go to the Quicksand family. Senior, follow me. I've been to the Quicksand family a few times, and I know some friends there. I can recommend Senior to enter the Quicksand family, Cao Feng said with a smile. Thank you, Uncle Cao Feng. Also, Uncle, don't call me Senior, just call me by my name, Zhuowen said with a happy expression. Cao Feng said seriously, don't say that. Your cultivation is higher than mine, so it's not wrong for me to call you Senior. However, if you're not used to it, I'll call you Brother Zhuo in the future, haha. Zhuowen smiled slightly. The three of them chatted for a while longer before getting up and preparing to leave the Gulan restaurant. Oh. So it's the Cao family's second master and Miss Jiyuan. What a coincidence to be able to meet the two of you here. An untimely voice suddenly sounded out from behind. Zhuowen, Cao Feng, and Cao Jiyuan turned around and saw a tall and thin man with a deathly pale face slowly walking over. Behind this tall and thin man, there were 4 people trembling in fear. Looking carefully, these 4 people all had powerful auras. They were all experts of the 7th level of Void Sky. As for the tall and thin man walking at the front, his aura was the strongest. Zhuowen could tell with a glance that this tall and thin man's cultivation had reached the peak of the 7th level of Void Sky, and the 4 people behind him were basically only at the early stage of the 7th level of Void Sky. Such a team, no matter where it was, could not be underestimated. It's the captain of the Shark Fleet, Shi Jiyu. Such a big shot actually appeared in the Gulan restaurant. Looking at Shi Gu's appearance, he should be here for Cao Feng and Cao Jiyuan. How did these two offend such a troublesome fellow like Shi Jiyu? Chapter 2285. One move. Cao Feng looked at Shi Jiyu with hostility. He had learned from Cao Jiyuan that she was chased by the shark slaughtering fleet on her way back to the Cao family and almost lost her life. Therefore, Cao Feng didn't have a good impression of the shark slaughtering fleet. Shi Jiyu, I don't have any relationship with you. Get lost now and don't appear in front of me, Cao Feng said coldly. Shi Gu's eyes were cold as he coldly snorted. He first glanced at Cao Jiyuan, who was beside Cao Feng, before his gaze landed on Zhuowen, who was standing behind Cao Feng. Cao Feng's cultivation was also at the peak of the Void Sky 7th step, and he was second only to Cao Shenbing in the Cao family. Shi Jiyu wasn't confident that he could defeat Cao Feng. Moreover, after Cao Jiyuan failed the assassination mission, Shi Jiyu didn't care much about it. What he cared about was the death of 2 of his subordinates. Moreover, they died in the hands of an unknown brat. Shi Jiyu stared coldly at Zhuowen and grinned, Void Sky 6th step. Not bad, not bad. Looking at your young age, you can cultivate to the Void Sky 6th step. It's obvious that your talent is excellent. Shi Jiyu looked at Cao Feng and said coldly, Second Master Cao, I'm not here for you today. I'm here for the brat behind you. This brat is very courageous. He killed many of my shark slaughtering fleet's people. Hearing this, Cao Feng's gaze became extremely strange. Cao Feng had personally experienced Zhuowen's strength in the Cao family. Even Cao Shenbing was scared to the point of kneeling in front of Zhuowen. It was obvious that Zhuowen's strength was definitely above the Void Sky 8th step. It wasn't that Cao Feng looked down on Shi Jiyu, but Shi Jiyu was only at the peak of the void sky 7th step. His strength was much weaker than Cao Xuanbing's. Even Cao Shenbing didn't dare to provoke Zhuowen. This Shi Jiyu must have a screw loose in his head. He actually dared to provoke Zhuowen. Wasn't he seeking his own death? The crowd was in an uproar, and some even shook their heads. They all thought that Shi Jiyu would look for Cao Feng to cause trouble. These were two great experts at the peak of void sky 7th step. If they really fought, then it would be a good show. But to their disappointment, not only did the two of them not meet, Shi Jiyu even found the white-clothed youth who was only at the void sky 6 steps. The difference between void sky 6 step and void sky 7th step was not small. In their opinion, if Shi Jiyu really looked for trouble with the white-clothed youth, the white-clothed youth would definitely die. Of course, there were also some people who were filled with righteous indignation. They felt that Shi Jiyu was bullying the weak. Cao Feng, you don't have to interfere in this matter today. If you interfere, you can't blame me for being ruthless. Shi Jiyu said in an imposing manner. The strange look in Cao Feng's eyes grew even more intense. He shook his head and said, I won't interfere in this matter. If you want to take revenge on Brother Zhuo, I won't stop you or oppose you. Shi Jiyu raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Cao Feng to be so easy to talk to. From the way Cao Feng and the white-robed young man chatted happily at the table, it was clear that Cao Feng and the white-robed young man had a good relationship. Originally, Shi Jiyu wanted to pay a price to prevent Cao Feng from interfering. But now, he discovered that Cao Feng had no intention of helping the white-robed young man. Only Zhuowen knew that in Cao Feng's eyes, Shi Jiyu was just a clown. Cao Feng naturally wouldn't help Zhuowen block Shi Jiyu. Little bastard, if you have the guts, come out of the Jiyulan restaurant and fight with me. If you don't, you can be a coward. I will wait outside the Jiyulan restaurant until you come out. Shi Jiyu coldly looked at Zhuowen and said. Zhuowen found it funny. He glanced at Shi Jiyu, stepped on the air with his right foot, and flew out of the Jiyulan restaurant. He said indifferently, I'm not interested in being a coward. As for fighting with you, there's no need. I only need to use one move. One move? I think you won't even have the chance to use one move. Shi Jiyu was startled at first, but then he laughed coldly and also jumped out of the Jiyulan restaurant. It was obvious that Shi Jiyu had misunderstood Zhuowen's meaning. This brat is quite gutsy. He actually rushed out of the Jiyulan restaurant to fight with Shi Jiyu so straightforwardly. Although his guts are not small, he is brave but not smart. He is too sharp, I'm afraid he will die young. When Zhuowen and Shi Jiyu flew out of the Gulan restaurant, many cultivators in the restaurant were waiting with raised heads, their eyes revealing an expression of watching a show. Of course, in the eyes of most people, Shi Jiyu would definitely win this battle. After all, Shi Gu's cultivation was much higher than the white-robed youth's. Brat, you have guts. As a reward, I'll let you make a move first. Make your move first. Otherwise, you won't have the chance to make your move again. Shi Jiyu placed his hands behind his back, his eyes filled with arrogance and disdain. It was obvious that he did not place Zhuowen in his eyes at all. Shi Gu's actions naturally received the cheers of many cultivators in the Jiyulan restaurant. There were even some cultivators who praised Shi Jiyu for his gentlemanly demeanor. Are you sure? Zhuowen said indifferently. You talk a lot of nonsense. If I let you make the first move, then make the first move. Why are you still talking so much nonsense? Shi Jiyu frowned and scolded Zhuowen rather impolitely. However, not long after he finished scolding, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuowen took out an ink-black phagocytosis from his spirit ring. Then, the phagocytosis was taken out and instantly expanded to several hundred feet in size. It rumbled and smashed down, heavily smashing in front of Shi Jiyu. The phagocytosis had already unlocked 2,000 restrictions. Its power was much more terrifying than before. As soon as the phagocytosis appeared, the surrounding space began to tremble and compress violently. This terrifying power immediately alarmed the entire Jiyulan restaurant and the surrounding starry sky. Shi Gu's pupils shrank to the size of needles. His heart was beating violently. A sense of death spread from his heart. He knew he was finished. The phagocytosis's power was too terrifying. Shi Jiyu also remembered the mocking smile on Cao Feng's face. At first, he did not understand, but now he did. He understood that this white-robed young man was not an ordinary Void Sky 6 Steps expert, but an expert who was far more terrifying than him. However, it was too late for regrets. The phagocytosis fell in front of him like a mountain. Shi Jiyu could only try his best to block the phagocytosis. Otherwise, he would really die here. Thinking of this, Shigu raised both of his hands. Then, a terrifying divine power gushed out. Boom! Unfortunately, Shigu's defense was in vain. The phagocytosis was like a hot knife through butter. It easily crushed Shigu's entire body like a piece of tofu. Shigu's entire body was crushed into countless pieces. Just like that, he died in front of everyone's eyes. At this moment, the entire Jiyu Lan restaurant fell silent. Everyone stared blankly at the huge phagocytosis outside, as well as Shi Jiyu, who was crushed into powder under the phagocytosis. Chapter 2286. Lu Jiyu Let's Go. Zhuowen no longer paid attention to the stupefied cultivators in the Gulan restaurant. With a wave of his sleeve, he summoned a flying ship, beckoned Cao Feng and Cao Jiuan to board, and then left. It was not until a long time after Zhuowen left that the silent Gulan restaurant finally burst into an uproar. The chief commander of the shark-slaughtering fleet, Shi Jiyu, was quite famous in the Gulan galaxy and was one of the few seventh-step Void Sky experts. But today, Shi Jiyu challenged a junior with a 6 steps Void Sky cultivation and was defeated in a single move. This shocked everyone in the old Orchid Star River. The Quicksand family was located in the central region of the Gulan galaxy. From a distance, it could be seen that the Quicksand family occupied hundreds of the best life planets in the central region of the Gulan galaxy. With so many life planets connected together, they formed a dazzling starland. This was the Quicksand family. Under Cao Feng's guidance, Zhuowen's flying ship quickly entered the Quicksand family's territory, but it was intercepted halfway. A team of black-armored soldiers intercepted the flying ship. This team stood on the back of a huge star beast. The leader of the team was a valiant young woman. This young woman was wrapped in black armor, and her black hair fluttered in the wind. Although her face was not beautiful, she had a different kind of charm. Zhuowen looked over and found that the entire group of cultivators, including the young woman in the lead, had arrogant expressions on their faces. When Zhuowen, Cao Feng, and Cao Jiuan stepped off the flying ship, the young woman glanced at the three of them coldly and said, "Who are you? Why have you come to the Quicksand family?" Cao Feng said politely, "This one is Cao Feng of the Cao family. This time, we are here for the space-time Quicksand River, so it's the second master of the Cao family." The young woman's expression relaxed and she immediately continued, "If you want to enter the space-time Quicksand River, I think second master Cao knows the rules, right?" "I know. Lu Jiyu told me a lot about the space-time Quicksand River," Cao Feng said with a slight smile. When the young woman heard Cao Feng mention Lu Gu's name, her beautiful eyes shrunk imperceptibly and her attitude became more cautious than before. The change in the young woman's expression naturally did not escape Zhuowen's eyes. It seemed that Cao Feng's friend had a high status in the Quicksand family. Otherwise, the young woman would not show such a cautious expression. "Second Master Cao, if you want to find Sir Lu, I can help you inform him," the young woman said warmly. Waving his hand, Cao Feng smiled, "There's no need for that. I have Lu Ju's contact number. I just sent him a message, so he should be here soon. In that case, we won't disturb Second Master Cao." The young woman nodded and left with her team. Not long after the young woman left, a long rainbow flew out from the depths of the Quicksand family and finally stopped in front of Zhuowen's group. This was a young man who was slightly plump. He had a sincere smile on his face and seemed a little naive. He gave people the impression that he was an honest and considerate person. Zhuowen glanced at the young man in surprise because the young man's cultivation was not high. He was only at the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm. Of course, Zhuowen was not only surprised by the young man's attitude, but also Cao Feng's attitude towards the young man. Cao Feng hurriedly went up to greet the young man with a smile on his face. He faced the young man with great enthusiasm, but the young man's expression was slightly arrogant. Although Cao Feng's cultivation was far higher than the young man's face was still full of arrogance. Of course, he did not look down on others. After all, Cao Feng was not an ordinary person. He would not ignore him. On the other hand, Cao Jiyuan was unhappy. Her beautiful eyes glanced at the young man with a trace of disdain. Big brother Zhuo, this is Lu Zhu, one of the deacons of the Quicksand family. My father has always treated him as a friend and often shared good things with him. Moreover, he helped Lu Zhu whenever he could. However, ever since my father was imprisoned by Cao Xianbing, Lu Zhu disappeared from the world and did not ask about my father's affairs. Cao Jiyuan naturally saw the surprise on Zhuowen's face and could not help but transmit her voice to Zhuowen. Zhuowen nodded. He now understood why Cao Jiyuan showed such disdain towards Lu Zhu. It seemed that Lu Zhu did not treat Cao Feng as a true friend. However, from Cao Feng's attitude, it seemed that he really did treat Lu Zhu as a friend. What Zhuowen did not understand was that Lu Zhu was just a small deacon of the Quicksand family. How could he be so arrogant? What Zhuowen did not know was that the Quicksand family was the #1 family in the old Orchid Star River. They had the strongest powerhouses and the deepest heritage. Cultivators who could serve as deacons of the Quicksand family, even if their cultivation was not high, their status and authority were sometimes much higher than the upper echelons of other forces. After all, this person represented the Quicksand family, a force that most cultivators in the old Orchid Star River could not afford to offend. This was also why Cao Feng was so polite to Lu Zhu, even though his cultivation was much higher than Lu Zhu's. Brother Lu, long time no see. How have you been? Cao Feng laughed and said. Lu Zhu also smiled and said, not bad. However, I haven't seen Brother Cao for a while. You should be busy with something, right? Cao Feng's expression turned cold as he smiled and said, yes, I was indeed busy with something and only found time to come out today. Speaking until here, Cao Feng pointed to Cao Jiyuan and Zhuowen behind him and said, this is my daughter, Jiyuan, and this is. When Cao Feng introduced Zhuowen, he paused for a moment. He was a little embarrassed as to how to introduce Zhuowen. After all, Zhuowen was very strong, even more terrifying than his big brother Cao Xianbing. If he did not address him properly, it would not be good to leave a bad impression on Zhuowen. Just as Cao Feng was hesitating, Zhuowen took the initiative to step forward and said with a smile, I am Uncle Cao's nephew, Cao Ji. Brother Cao, so you have a nephew? How come I've never heard of it? Lu Zhu looked at Zhuowen in surprise, but said with a smile. Chapter 2287. Absorbing the starry sky divine veins. By the way, what brings Brother Cao to the Quicksand family? Lu Zhu cut to the chase. Cao Feng didn't hold back and said, we've come for the river of spacetime quicksand this time. I hope Brother Lu can give us a recommendation. In this way, we'll be able to avoid a great deal of trouble and procedures. With that, Cao Feng silently handed a spirit ring to Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu calmly put away the spirit ring. His divine sense had already quietly scanned the spirit ring, and a satisfied look appeared in his eyes. He smiled and said, no problem, but you may need to wait for about 2 months. Lord Kuang Lu is currently refining a void sky divine artifact, and I'm afraid it will take another 2 months. I will inform you when Lord Kuang Lu comes out of seclusion. It's fine. Since Lord Kuang Lu is busy, we won't disturb him. We'll wait for 2 months. Cao Feng waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. Lu Zhu didn't look embarrassed at all. He smiled and said, how about this? I'll arrange a place for the 3 of you to stay. I'll inform you in 2 months. After saying that, Lu Zhu brought the 3 of them into one of the life planets of the Quicksand family and chose a rather elegant pavilion for the 3 of them to live in. After settling the 3 of them, Lu Zhu took his leave. After Lu Zhu left, Zhuowen couldn't help but ask, Brother Cao, is Kuang Lu of the Quicksand family an artifact refiner? Cao Feng said in surprise, Brother Zhuo, you didn't know. Lord Kuang Lu is not only the strongest expert in the Gulan galaxy, but is also a renowned artifact refiner in the Six Desires heavenly region. Then what kind of void sky divine artifact can Kuang Lu refine? Can he refine a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact? Zhuowen's heart began to pound. I have 4 Dao fruits that I obtained from Fatima Yujie. These 4 Dao fruits can be integrated into the phagocytosis, giving the phagocytosis Dao rhymes that surpass a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact. If I want to integrate the Dao fruits into the phagocytosis, I must find a powerful artifact refiner. However, in the vast universe, finding a powerful artifact refiner was even more difficult than finding a divine array master. This was because blacksmiths were much rarer than divine array masters. Now that Zhuowen heard that you, Kuang Li, were a powerful weapon refiner, how could he not be excited? Cao Feng pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, I once heard that Lord Kuang Lu had once forged a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, but the success rate was very low. However, he succeeded in forging a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, and this matter shook the entire Six Desires heavenly domain. Zhuowen was shocked. This Kuang Gravel was not simple. He had actually refined a secondary heaven-breaking divine tool. It had to be known that the majority of secondary heaven-breaking divine tools were either left behind from ancient times or formed naturally in the universe. The true forging method had long since declined. It was too difficult to find a powerful blacksmith now. Moreover, Zhuowen wasn't asking the blacksmiths to forge a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Instead, he was asking them to fuse the Dao fruit into the phagocytosis. This was clearly much simpler than forging a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Since Kuang Li had successfully forged a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, fusing the Dao fruit into the phagocytosis shouldn't be too difficult for him. Brother Zhuo, do you have something that you need Lord Kuang Li to refine for you? Cao Feng saw through Zhuowen's intentions and couldn't help but ask. Yes, I have a damaged divine tool. This divine tool is very important to me. However, I haven't been able to find a suitable blacksmith before. This time, I met Kuang Li of the Quicksand family. It's really a bit of luck. Zhuowen smiled. Cao Feng frowned and said, Brother Zhuo, it's not that I want to pour cold water on you, but Lord Kuang Li's temperament is extremely strange. When he helps others refine divine tools, it depends on his mood. In the past 100 years, he has only refined one divine tool for one person. Other than that, he has only refined divine tools for experiments, so Zhuowen understood Cao Feng's meaning. It was extremely difficult to get Kuang Li to help him refine divine tools. Of course, if the price was enough, Zhuowen didn't believe that Cao Feng wouldn't help him refine phagocytosis. Ever since he robbed many sects in the Great Brahma domain and had a rich harvest in the bone world, Zhuowen was now a veritable rich man. His wealth could be described as comparable to a country. With his wealth, it shouldn't be too difficult to get Kuang Li to help him. After chatting with Cao Feng and Cao Jiuan for a while, Zhuowen locked himself in his room. After setting up a powerful formation, Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the cattail hassock and his eyes flickered. It's time to increase my realm. This time, I obtained many high-quality starry sky divine veins in the small world on the bloodstained cliff. I wonder if these starry sky divine veins can help me break through the void sky 7th step. Zhuowen muttered softly. With a flick of his finger, a starry sky divine vein that was dotted with stars appeared in front of Zhuowen. The starry sky divine vein contained extremely rich starry sky energy. The starry sky divine vein that appeared in front of Zhuowen was enough to cultivate thousands of true gods to the virtual sky world. Zhuowen had hundreds and thousands of such starry sky divine veins, which was enough to show how rich Zhuowen was now. Although such a starry sky divine vein was precious to ordinary cultivators and even priceless, for Zhuowen, it probably wasn't enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Ever since he absorbed the true dragon's blood, Zhuowen discovered that the amount of energy he needed to cultivate was much greater than before. Furthermore, he discovered that although his realm was still at the 6th step of the void sky realm, his strength was constantly increasing, and at an extremely fast rate. Zhuowen knew that all of this was because of the blood of the real dragon. Therefore, this time, Zhuowen still felt a little uncertain about whether he could break through the void sky 7th step. Even though he had many starry sky divine veins, he was still quite worried. Let's absorb this starry sky divine vein first. Zhuowen shook his head and didn't think much about it. He closed his eyes slightly and pressed his hands on the starry sky divine vein. Suddenly, waves of rich starry sky energy flowed from the starry sky divine vein along Zhuowen's arms and into his 8 extraordinary meridians. 1 month later, Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the dried-up starry sky divine vein in front of him and sighed in his heart. This is already the 10th starry sky divine vein, but my cultivation has only reached the peak of the void sky 6th step. I'm still a bit away from the void sky 7th step. Although Zhuowen had only consumed 10 starry sky divine veins, he knew himself well. He was still a distance away from the void sky 7th step. Even if he absorbed more starry sky divine veins, it wouldn't help him. After all, he couldn't comprehend it. If he spoiled it with excessive enthusiasm, the gains would not make up for the losses. Chapter 2288. Wind disaster. Of course, there was another reason why he opened his eyes. It was because there was finally some movement from his doppelganger. His doppelganger had always been placed in the Kangland secret territory to absorb the disaster crystal veins for cultivation. When his doppelganger was a 1 disaster true god and a 2 disasters true god, his speed of absorbing the disaster crystal veins was extremely fast. But after Zhuowen became a thunder fire true god, his speed of absorbing the disaster crystal veins had become much slower. His doppelganger only needed 1 or 2 months to absorb a small mountain of disaster crystal veins. But now, it could not finish absorbing it even after a few years. Today, even though the avatar failed to absorb all the calamity crystals in the surrounding hills, it finally welcomed the arrival of the long-awaited calamity wind disaster. Walking out of his residence, Zhuowen sent a message to Cao Feng and quietly left the area where the Quicksand family was located. In the extreme north of the old Orchid Galaxy, there was a huge galaxy. This galaxy contained a terrifying amount of ice element. Looking from afar, it was simply an endless ice field. This place was considered a famous danger zone in the old Orchid Galaxy. It was called the Death Ice Field. The ice element in this place was extremely terrifying. It constantly flowed and raged, forming all kinds of ice element attacks, such as blizzards, ice blades, and so on. Generally speaking, riches and honor were found in danger. The more dangerous a place was, the more likely it was to be accompanied by great wealth and treasures. However, the Death Ice Field was definitely an exception. This was because this place was a famous wasteland. Once, the strongest expert in the old Orchid Galaxy, Quang Li, explored the Death Ice Field but found nothing. Because of this, coupled with the fact that the Death Ice Field was not small, it caused this place to be deserted. Now, there was no one at all. This was also the main reason why Zhuowen chose the Death Ice Field. After all, the best place to undergo the tribulation was naturally a deserted area. Otherwise, if the tribulation was too loud, it would be easy to be discovered by others. This was not the result that Zhuowen wanted. After entering the Death Ice Field, Zhuowen immediately felt a cold resistance. Obviously, the cold air in the Death Ice Field was quite terrifying. Otherwise, it would not have given Zhuowen such resistance. Zhuowen did not want to waste too much time in front of this cold chi, and immediately brought out the Everlasting Ice Lotus. The Everlasting Ice Lotus contained the origin of ice, and possessed a powerful commanding power that ruled over other cold energies. In front of the Everlasting Ice Lotus, the cold energy of the Death Ice Plains was nothing. With the boundless Ice Lotus in hand, Zhuowen entered the deepest part of the icy plains of death like a hot knife through butter. Finally, he stopped at an empty space. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and summoned the black-clothed Zhuowen. At this moment, the black-clothed Zhuowen's face was flushed red as if he was enduring something. Zhuowen knew that his clone was enduring the erosion of the wind disaster. The wind disaster was the most terrifying of the 3 disasters. Moreover, The wind in the wind disaster was not the wind from the east, west, north, or south. It was not the wind from the north, nor was it the wind from the flowers, willows, pines, and bamboo. Blowing from the fontanelle to the 6 bowels, passing through the dantian and the 9 apertures, dissipating the bones and flesh, the body will know the solution. It could be said that the wind disaster did not come from the outside to the inside, but from the inside to the outside, directly scraping the body. It should be known that even for a cultivator, the body was very weak. Moreover, there was no divine weapon to defend against the wind disaster. As the wind disaster came from the inside, it was imaginable how much damage it would cause to a cultivator's 5 viscera and 6 bowels. Moreover, Zhuowen also realized that ever since his clone became the real god of thunder and fire, the power of the wind disaster was much stronger than that of an ordinary cultivator. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Just as Zhuowen's original body was in deep thought, the clone that was floating in the icy plains let out a groan and a gust of wind gushed out from the apertures on his entire body. The gust of wind was grayish-black in color. If one did not pay attention, one might think that it was smoke. However, if one were to take a closer look, it was actually a grayish-black gust of wind. The grayish-black gust of wind gathered continuously and formed a huge tornado in the end. As soon as the tornado appeared on the icy plains, the solid icy plains began to collapse and crumble. It was actually blown into fine powder by the wind. The gust of wind gushing out from the clone's apertures grew stronger and stronger, and the surrounding icy plains began to crumble. It was a spectacular sight to behold. Fortunately, there were no signs of human habitation within a radius of tens of millions of li around the death icy plains. Therefore, this sensational event did not attract the attention of the cultivators of the Gulen Star River. The wind disaster lasted for a full day and night. When the wind disaster finally ended, the black-clothed Zhuowen's entire body went limp and fell to the ground. Zhuowen's original body supported the black-clothed Zhuowen, but his gaze became extremely cautious. At this moment, the black-clothed Zhuowen was extremely weak. His 5 viscera and 6 bowels were almost completely destroyed by the wind disaster. If not for the fact that the black-clothed Zhuowen's original body was devour, which gave him an extremely strong vitality, the black-clothed Zhuowen would have already died. What a terrifying wind disaster! This is only the first wind disaster. Zhuowen's gaze was cold. After experiencing the first and second wind disasters, Zhuowen had actually grasped a certain pattern. Generally speaking, the first wind disaster was the most terrifying, and the subsequent ones were relatively simple. This was the first hurdle. However, the 9th wind disaster was another hurdle. The 9th wind disaster was far more terrifying than the first wind disaster. It was even more terrifying than the previous wind disasters combined. The third hurdle was the 14th wind disaster, and the final hurdle was the 20th wind disaster. This was the conclusion that Zhuowen had reached after experiencing the 2 wind disasters. This wind disaster should also follow the same pattern. The first wind disaster would be more powerful and terrifying than the following 7 wind disasters. Since Zhuowen could survive the first wind disaster, it meant that he did not need to worry about the remaining 7 wind disasters. However, when it came to the 9th wind disaster, Zhuowen would have to pay extra attention. After that, it would be the 14th wind disaster, and finally, the 19th wind disaster. Zhuowen knew that once he survived the 19th wind disaster, he would be teleported to the Tower of Hanoi. This was a backup plan that Lord Brahma had arranged for him long ago. Moreover, after surviving this wind disaster, although Zhuowen did not find that the strength of his doppelganger had increased by much, the toughness of his internal organs was much stronger than before. Zhuowen knew very well that once his avatar's internal organs were repeatedly tempered and cultivated internally and externally, it would be very difficult for external attacks to inflict internal injuries on him. After all, even his internal organs had been tempered to be indomitable. Unless it was a fatal injury, Zhuowen would not easily suffer internal injuries. After the black-clothed Zhuowen took a drop of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence, he was taken into the Kanglan secret realm by Zhuowen's main body to recuperate in peace. Zhuowen, on the other hand, left the icy field of death. After following the original path back to the residence arranged by Lu Zhu of the Quicksand family, Zhuowen went into seclusion again. In the remaining month, Zhuowen spent all his time on the Dao fruit and the heavenly Dao blood. The Dao fruit was born from the cultivation ground of a Dao confirming expert, while the heavenly Dao blood was obtained by a Void Sky 9 Ascension expert who comprehended the heavenly Dao. Although the Void Sky 9 Ascension expert was far weaker than a Dao confirming expert, the heavenly Dao blood was the essence of the heavenly Dao confirming expert. Although the heavenly Dao blood was much stronger than the heavenly Dao blood, the essence of the heavenly Dao blood was the same as the essence of the heavenly Dao blood. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.